No. Okay. Order, order. Paul Davis to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 700005 relating to the UK joining the European Union. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, Mr Mundell. The petition is on an important subject and has gained over 128,537 signatures. The lead petitioner, Robert McMaster, is sat there in the public gallery with his amazing wife as well, because we were chatting earlier on. He is not a stranger to this place, because as he's informed me, he was shown around the whole of the state as a very young boy, as his father, Stanley McMaster, represented Belfast between 1959 and 1974. So, welcome back again. The petition has a straightforward ask of the government. Apply for the UK to join the European Union as a full member as soon as possible. The petition states that I believe joining the EU would boost the economy, increase global influence, improve collaboration and provide stability and freedom. I believe that Brexit hasn't brought any tangible benefit and there is no future prospect of any, that the UK has changed its mind and that this should be recognised. I will now turn to the topic at hand. This is a matter that has sparked considerable debate across our nation since the referendum in 2016. And it's essential that we approach this with a balanced perspective, considering both the benefits and the challenges it presents. The decision to leave the European Union in 2016 was a momentous one and has had profound implications for our country. As we stand here today, we must reflect on the journey we have taken since then and consider the future path that lies ahead. The question before us is whether the UK should seek to join the European Union, and if so, what the implications of such a move would be. Many people would argue there are several compelling arguments in favour of the UK rejoining the European Union, and I'm sure we'll hear many of those through this debate. Firstly, membership in the EU provides significant economic benefits. The EU is one of the largest single markets in the world, and being part of it would grant UK businesses access to over 450 million consumers. The argument is that this access would boost trade, create jobs and stimulate economic growth. I'm sure that a number of colleagues in the Chamber today will argue that rejoining the EU would facilitate smoother trade relations with our closest neighbours. Of course.
Mr Mundell, you and I both know that the European structural funds were fundamental to some of the remotest parts of the UK in terms of investment in harbours, roads and infrastructure. So can I just say to the honourable member that that was a benefit that we enjoyed when we were part of the EU, and we hope, whatever happens in the future, that future governments or this government will seek to replicate that and replace it.
Thank you for those comments. I very much appreciate that, and I think as we go through this debate, I'm sure we'll get much more detail around similar issues. And I will refer later on to what the government is currently doing in trying to make sure we establish a close relationship with Europe. Since Brexit, we know that UK businesses have faced increased bureaucracy and border checks, which have hindered the flow of goods and services. The petitioner and others have argued that rejoining the EU could alleviate these issues, making it easier for businesses to operate and thrive. Another important consideration is the potential for enhanced security cooperation. The EU has robust mechanisms for collaboration on issues such as counter-terrorism, intelligence sharing and law enforcement. By rejoining, the argument is that the UK could strengthen its security ties with European partners, contributing to a safer and more secure environment for our citizens. Of course.
congratulating for securing the debate and thank you for giving way. I support rejoining and always oppose leaving for the reasons he outlines around national security and our national interest. Is he surprised, though, that there were no members of Reform present in the Chamber? And does he believe it's because they spend more time sucking up to Trump and Putin than representing the constituents, in particular those in Clacton?
Thank you. I'd like to thank the honourable member for his comments. I won't make particular comments on the comments, but they're well put and well made. I am rather surprised. I did expect members of Reform to be present, but, well, I'm sure they have good reasons. They're probably working closely. They could be. Yeah. I couldn't possibly say. Furthermore, that rejoining the EU would allow the UK to have a say in shaping the rules and regulations that govern the single market. This influence would be crucial in ensuring that our interests would be represented and that we could advocate for policies that would benefit our economy and society. On the other hand, there are valid arguments against rejoining the European Union.
Before he goes there, could I?
Of course.
I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to debate membership of the EU. And of course, we know the weight of the economic benefit of that and to secure trade. But does he not also agree at a time of real global instability, having that political union is also really important too?
Again, I'd like to thank the honourable member for those comments. I think we see in that absolutely now, and in the chamber we've all discussed that in recent times, and we've seen the fantastic work that the PM is doing in terms of working with our close neighbours. So absolutely, working as close as we can across Europe is crucial at the moment with what we are facing from Russia as a threat to all of us. Yeah, I'm happy to sit down. Let's go.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. One of the reasons that was given for us leaving the EU was so that the UK could develop stronger relations with countries further afield. One of those countries was the US, but with the American president being somewhat gung-ho with tariffs and his willingness to be best friends with the president of Russia, does the honourable gentleman agree with me that we should be looking to strengthen our relations with our nearest cousins in Europe?
Paul Davis.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments. Again, this is a subject, as you know, we've discussed a number of times now in the chamber. Absolutely, we need to be working very closely with our friends in Europe, and I think that's crucial. We've seen that need for stability and that ability to be able to understand how we move forward in the next few years. It's true to say that that the relationship between us and the new president of the US is newly formed and is starting to evolve and is going in perhaps a different way of creating that relationship than's been in the past. However, I am confident that with the fantastic team that we've got along with our Prime Minister, that we will establish ongoing a continued relationship with one of our most important partners, the US as well. But absolutely, Europe is so important for us to be part of that going forward when it comes to security. One of the primary concerns that's been raised about valid arguments for leaving the EU is around the issue of sovereignty. Leaving the EU was, in part, driven by a desire to regain control over laws and regulations. Rejoining the EU would mean ceding some of that control back to Brussels, which might not sit too well with those who value national sovereignty. Additionally, the financial cost of EU membership is a significant consideration. The UK would be required to contribute to the EU budget, which could be seen as a burden on taxpayers. While the economic benefits of membership may offset those costs, it is an important issue to consider. And then, of course, there's the question of public opinion. I think we'll all remember that the 2016 referendum revealed deep divisions within our society, and the issue of EU membership remains contentious. Rejoining the EU could reignite some of those divisions and lead to further political instability. The Prime Minister has made clear that the UK government has ruled out the possibility of rejoining the European Union. However, since July, it has concentrated efforts on strengthening our relationship with the EU. The government has prioritised resetting the UK's relationship with the EU. This has involved a series of initiatives aimed at reducing barriers to trade, enhancing security cooperation and fostering closer ties with European partners.
Am I able to take an intervention?
Of course.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. My honourable friend mentioned costs of EU membership, but of course many businesses have suffered additional costs because of withdrawal from the European Union, including our touring artists and creative sector. Would you agree with me that in negotiating a refreshed and rebuilt relationship with the EU, ensuring it's easier for our touring artists to go to Europe and to ensure they can promote their work and their labour there should be an early priority within those negotiations you just mentioned?
Thank you for those comments, and absolutely agree with you. I think that's certainly something that's very apparent from what in terms of a deficit, if you like, of where we are now. We know that we have an amazing cultural heritage in this country, but also amazing music and touring ability. And some of our bands have really struggled, and some of our artists have really struggled to make sure that they've got a future across Europe. So I would absolutely agree that should be a priority. One of the key steps taken by the government has been the negotiation of a veterinary agreement to reduce border checks on agri-foods. This agreement aims to streamline the movement of agricultural products between the UK and the EU, benefiting both farmers and consumers. Additionally, the government has sought a mutual recognition agreement for professional qualifications, which would facilitate the movement of skilled workers and open up markets for UK service exporters. In the realm of security, the UK has been working towards an ambitious new UK-EU security pact, and we've already referred to this. And this pact aims to enhance collaboration on security and defence policy, ensuring that the UK and the EU can work together to address common threats. Yep.
Honourable Gentleman giving me a valiant job of introducing this debate. But would you agree that a government that's not even prepared to countenance a youth mobility scheme in order to try and reset its relationship isn't going to get all that far? And we're certainly not going to get into the territory of what we really need, which is re-entry to the single market in the customs union. Surely that's where we should be looking to make some progress.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the comments. It's true that's one area that's been discussed and looked at, and various proposals have been put forward. I think the focus that I was trying to outline there, which is a focus on the ground now, in light of the serious security concerns we've got, the closeness between our Prime Minister and our government with our European partners, should be looked at as a real positive and as a real base for future working and for future development, and maybe in issues such as you're pointing out and other issues. So I think it gives us a great foundation. So the government has been actively engaging with European partners through regular meetings and dialogues, demonstrating a commitment to rebuilding trust and cooperation. And I think that word trust is so important. So, in conclusion, the question of whether the UK should rejoin the European Union is a complex and multifaceted one. There are compelling arguments on both sides, and it is essential that we carefully consider the potential benefits and challenges. As we move forward, it's crucial that we engage in open and honest discussions, taking into account the diverse perspectives within our society. The government's efforts to strengthen relations with the EU since July demonstrates a commitment to finding common ground and building a more cooperative future. Ultimately, the decision on whether to rejoin the European Union must be made with careful consideration of the long-term interests of our country. Let us continue to engage in this important dialogue, working together to shape a prosperous and secure future for the United Kingdom. I conclude by thanking the lead petitioner again and all those who signed this important petition. I look forward to hearing from all right honourable and honourable members about their views of the petition. Thank you, Chair.
I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. I don't intend at this stage to set a time limit because this is a 3-hour debate. But I would ask members just to be mindful of others. The question is that this House has considered e-petition 700005 relating to the UK joining the European Union, and I call Mike Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. We're at a key geopolitical moment, and that key geopolitical moment encompasses both economic issues and issues of security and defence. Britain leaving the EU has damaged our economy. This is not a supposition, this is a fact. We have the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is the watchdog that the government is beholden to listen to for economic forecasts, saying that our economy has been reduced by 4% because of Brexit. We can also look at these trade deals that were one of the benefits of Brexit, and we can see perhaps that trade deal with Australia. And these were held up and touted as the benefits of Brexit. You would have to look very, very hard with a very powerful microscope to see the bump in the UK GDP figures that we gained from the Australian trade deal. But you do not need to look very hard to see the anger and ire from our farmers about the questions of food safety standards and the changes in the agricultural market in the UK. When I speak to small businesses in my community of Tunbridge Wells, they are absolutely appalled by Brexit. Whether they are a small bookseller, whether they grow apples and export them, whether they are an artist, it doesn't really matter who you are. If you are a small business, Brexit has been a disaster. Because I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he mentioned small businesses, and I just want to say, as a small business owner myself who does import goods from the European Union, I know firsthand that things that I used to be able to import that used to be able to take days now take weeks, and whereas they used to require a purchase order and an invoice as the sole bits of paperwork, we now have to fill in very complicated forms, and it's very costly. These are costs that are added to small businesses with absolutely no benefit. They have to be passed on to consumers. This is damaging our economy every single day. Does he agree with me that this is certainly not a benefit of Brexit?
Marvellous. Ladies and gentlemen, a perfect example, Mr. Chair. I could list example after example of small businesses that say, you know what, 20% of our business, we've had to just stop doing that because we are no longer able to turn a profit on it because of the time we have to spend filling out forms. So I'm going to move from the effects of Brexit directly on our trade with the European Union to the wider effects of Brexit, because one of the things that we see in this current geopolitical moment is the threat of tariffs, which I think, if we're honest, is something that we thought we'd probably seen the back of in the early 1930s. But of course we are in this new world, and this new world includes the United Kingdom becoming a target for tariffs from our supposed closest ally. And of course we see a supine response from the British government with the setting of tariffs against our steel industry. Now the question is, of course, were we part of a market that had several 100 million people in it, and a market which is the largest trading area on the planet, would we be supine in the face of that in the way that we are being now, when we are a market of 70 million people and the 6th largest economy in the world? I ask you that. But EU membership is not just about economics, it's also about security. And in many, very small ways, our security has been damaged by Brexit. I speak, of course, of intelligence sharing, access to databases, the sharing of data across borders. And then, of course, we used to have the Dublin Convention, which allowed us to negotiate the return of refugees in a way that we are not able to now. But actually, damaging our relationship with Europe has damaged us in a much more profound way, and that is now being exposed by the actions of the Trump government. As we all know, the Trump government is withdrawing the American security guarantee for Europe. Now, we can quibble about whether that's happening, but certainly the comments this weekend from Steve Witkoff should give us pause for thought. We should at least be considering this as a significant possibility. And the Americans removing the security guarantee from Europe exposes us all. And I'll give you a very real example that happened just last week. As you know, the EU set up a defence fund, and they set this up to put money into the European defence industries to prime them to get them building equipment, to get them building munitions. And the UK has been excluded from that because we are not a member of the EU. Now, we can quibble about the politics of that and whether France's role in that was the right thing to do for European defence. But what we have is a situation where 20% of the European defence industry, that is the UK defence industry, is separated from all of the money that's going to buy all of that kit. So I'd like to conclude, Mr. Chair, by focusing on these two ideas, economy and security. And I would like to say that they are interlinked. A strong economy, of course, enables you to build strong defences. But the stability created by security and defence, appropriately deployed, allows economies to grow. And then, of course, it is also true that money that you invest in defence helps your economy grow. And this is something that Brexit is stopping us doing. We must forge a closer relationship with Europe. And we must do this so that the UK can start to shape the future rather than having the future shape us.
Sean Woodcock.
Pleasure to serve under you, Chair, and I thank and congratulate the Honourable Member for Conn Valley on opening the debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee. Banbury has a proud history as a hub for industry and manufacturing. From the aluminium works, which were crucial to the construction of aircraft during World War II, and which my grandfather later worked at, to the automotive supply chains, green tech startups and Formula One teams, which call my constituency home today. These companies, amongst many others, rely on smooth, efficient trade with the European Union. The psychodrama, which defined the final 8 years of the last Conservative government, culminated in a botched Brexit deal, which put up barriers to trade, soured relations with our closest allies, and ultimately left our constituents out of pocket. So I welcome the reset in relations between the UK and the European Union, which has taken place since the general election, and I believe we now have a real opportunity to forge a new and more constructive relationship with our European friends. Hundreds of constituents have written to me, signed petitions including this one, and spoken to me on the doorstep about the damage caused by Brexit. I've also had the privilege of hearing and meeting business owners across Banbury who once enjoyed seamless access to European markets, but who now feel buried under the very paperwork and bureaucracy that Brexiteers once promised to eliminate. Take, for example, EAV, an exciting Banbury-based company manufacturing electric-assisted bikes. These bikes represent the future of urban green transport, a sector the UK could be leading in. But instead of expanding easily across Europe, as they once could, they now face an avalanche of paperwork. They told me that what was once a single-page document is now 20 pages. That is a clear and direct demonstration of the previous government's failure to deliver a Brexit deal which works for British business. Or consider the BMW plant down the road in Oxford, a cornerstone of the UK automotive industry. When I spoke to workers alongside my right honourable friend, the member for Oxford East, a few weeks ago, it became clear that Brexit was a key factor in BMW shifting production away from the UK and towards the EU and China.
Apologies, Chair.
The reality is that multinational manufacturers now find it cheaper and easier to downsize their workforces in the UK than European counterparts. This is not a situation that we should accept. Banbury is home to a network of key automotive suppliers, including Magna Exterior Systems, Faurecia, HBPO and Borg & Beck. All of them rely on just-in-time supply chains in Europe. When delays at borders increase costs, when additional import-export paperwork slows down deliveries, and when rules of origin requirements limit market access, it is British workers who suffer. Under the current UK-EU trade and cooperation agreement, goods must comply to certain rules of origin regulations to qualify for tariff-free trade. This has created new challenges for businesses, particularly manufacturers, who previously enjoyed seamless trade with the European Union. For example, a UK-based bus manufacturer exporting to the EU must ensure that at least 55% of the vehicle's value is derived from UK or EU components. But many manufacturers rely on parts from outside of the UK and the EU, making it harder to meet this requirement. Rejoining the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention would ease these constraints, keeping manufacturers competitive in European and global markets. By rejoining the PEM, components sourced from all 51 PEM countries would count as local content, making it easier for British businesses to qualify for tariff-free trade. This would be particularly beneficial for the automotive, chemical, pharmaceutical and machinery sectors. While rejoining PEM won't solve all of the post-Brexit trade issues, it is a practical and immediate step towards restoring smoother trade flows. It was signalled to the EU that the UK is serious about improving trade relations while staying outside the customs union and single market, as I referred to earlier. So today I would urge right honourable colleagues to listen. Happy to give way.
Giving way. Just to support him on his encouragement for the UK to accede to the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention, I was at a meeting last week of the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly in Brussels, and they issued a recommendation which called for options to be explored for closer customs cooperation and alignment of regulatory standards, which goes further than the current UK government position, in order to facilitate trade and economic growth. And this could include, for example, UK accession to the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention. So I hope very much that my friend is pushing at an open door both with the UK and the European Union.
I thank my honourable friend for his contribution. As I said, we have an opportunity to reduce barriers to trade, support manufacturing, attract investment and rebuild a closer relationship with Europe. The government has rightly set a mission of making the UK the fastest growing economy in the G7 by the end of this Parliament, and I believe joining PEM would be a logical step towards achieving that goal. Thank you very much, Chair.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
January this year, the end of January, we mark 5 years since the UK left the EU. And while a majority in the UK, and indeed a majority in Wales, voted to leave the EU that time, the majority don't think this was a good idea anymore. Polling shows that 55% of Britons now say it was wrong for the UK to leave the EU, with just 11% seeing Brexit as more of a success than a failure. And let us not forget either that young people voted decisively to remain.
On that point, we're going to amend the new plan.
Yes, indeed, of course.
Last week, I asked the Prime Minister whether he'd negotiate a youth mobility scheme with the EU, and he replied that we're not returning to free movement, but seemed to forget that we've already got similar schemes with countries such as South Korea and Australia based on work and travel for a specified duration of time. Does my honourable friend agree with me that a youth mobility scheme would not mean a return to free movement, but rather a fantastic opportunity to boost our economy and the prospects of people in Epsom and Ewell and the UK?
Indeed, I agree with her absolutely, and I do think that it is a priority for us as parliamentarians and for the government to make sure that we do everything to widen the horizons for our young people and to give them every best opportunity that we possibly can. And it said, according to polling data from YouGov, 3/4 of 18 to 24-year-olds back in 2016 voted to stay in the European Union. And there was a myth peddled at the time they didn't turn out to vote. This was wrong. Around 70% of registered young voters went to the polling booths at that time. And 9 years later, the next generation remains decisively opposed to Brexit. 75% say it was a mistake. And as we look ahead to the future, we must now think seriously about the effect of this decision on young people, many of whom entered the workforce under its cloud, while many would not have been able to vote at all at the time. What was getting Brexit done? What has it done for them? What has it meant for them? The UK no longer allows young people to take part in the Horizon Opening Erasmus Plus programme. This is a huge loss to students the length and breadth of the UK. These vital exchanges used to provide opportunities for young people to live and study in other countries, and the many benefits of the programme used to include improved language skills, cultural immersion and personal growth. The sort of memories that stay with somebody forever. And I'll give way to my friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and she makes a very important point. And of course, another benefit of such schemes were also felt in communities such as mine in Ceredigion Preseli, the university towns, who also benefited from a cultural exchange, and indeed the way in which visitors from the EU enriched many of our communities.
And that very polling from January by YouGov that I quoted earlier on notes that everybody sees that tourism has been hit. For people from the UK to go to the EU for tourism, and for people to come from the EU to UK. And of course, for areas such as yours, my honourable friends in Ceredigion, and mine in Gwynedd, tourism is a key component of our economy, as of course is our universities, of course.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and exactly on that point, Harrogate is an area that relies on tourism too. And one of the issues that we've had are local businesses saying they've struggled to recruit. They used to have people from the EU coming over, and that's actually seen businesses have to shut up, close early, and cost jobs. So does she agree with me that if we want to return, if we have a return to freedom of movement and allow those opportunities, it will benefit, and that might actually help the Chancellor with a mission for growth?
Indeed, and ensure that there is a workforce for leisure and tourism is proving more and more challenging for a number of reasons, including a shortage of workers who previously came to the EU. But to return to Erasmus+, the Welsh Government made a decision to launch its own scheme in 2021, and that is, of course, to be welcomed. But the First Minister of the time, Mark Drakeford, he said himself February last year, if we had the choice, we would much rather we were part of an established scheme like Erasmus. Disappointingly, the UK Government announced last summer that it has no plans to rejoin the Erasmus scheme. But I would ask the Government to reconsider and look at recent successes in making closer ties with our neighbours. Calls for a youth mobility scheme have also been scorned by the UK Government. What is it about enriching young people's lives that frightens this Government so much?
What's that?
Just this month, the UK marked an important milestone with Horizon Europe, and this is an indicator of an alternative route. Since becoming an associated country in 2024, after 3 years of non-membership, the UK has boasted a strong performance in recent funding rounds. In particular, the UK hosted 18 successful projects under the European Research Council's Synergy grants, the second highest number among participating countries. Ahead of the spring statement, when the Chancellor will undoubtedly be looking for opportunities to drive growth amid a dismal economic outlook, I would urge the Government to find inspiration from our progress with Horizon and pursuing closer ties in further areas. My party believes that returning to the single market and the customs union as soon as possible would be a meaningful step in remedying the economic damage suffered by households and businesses alike. Recent figures by the Economic Cost of Brexit project show that the average person in the UK is now £2,000 worse off as a result of leaving the European Union, worsening, of course, the effects of the ongoing cost of living crisis. To close, Mr Mundell, 5 years on from our exit from the EU, the world is a more uncertain, more dangerous and less predictable place. From my home in Morfa Nefyn, North West Wales, The closest capital city is Dublin. Our nearest neighbours for everyone, everywhere in the United Kingdom are in the EU. The benefits of closer ties with our neighbours and our allies are plain to see. And I would urge the government to take heart from recent successes such as Horizon Europe and pursue the same bold approach on youth mobility, Erasmus, the customs union and the single market.
Yes. Tim Rocker.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm grateful to Member Valley for starting us off in this debate, an important debate that proves the importance of the petition mechanism to the public for getting important issues debated in this place. 80 years ago, constituents in Macclesfield voted to remain part of the European Union. A referendum based, as we know, on imperfect knowledge, a referendum called because of the internal politics of the Conservative Party, an attempt to see off the member for Clacton and his insistent Europhobe right, a group of people who would never be satisfied, as we subsequently discovered. And the context of calling that election, of course, was incredibly bizarre. We'd already been through the life and death experience of the Scottish referendum that put the UK's constitutional future at stake. It was also in the wake of the Russian annexation of Crimea. What a bizarre time to be holding a question on the fundamental membership of an important political economic alliance. And we know how that referendum developed. It was vitriolic, influenced by the Russians undoubtedly, and it ended just a few days before in the tragic death of one of our colleagues, murdered on the streets of the UK. And the consequences of the decision that we took, we can now see really clearly, as members have been pointing out expertly this afternoon. 14,000 of 100,000 firms surveyed by the London School of Economics have quit trading with the European Union altogether. Many small businesses in my constituency talk about the barriers that others have mentioned, the red tape, the bureaucracy. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research points out that FDI, foreign direct investment, has fallen 37%. And the OBR has that scary figure, which is in all our minds, of the 4% that the UK has lost. The UK economy will be 4% smaller in 2035 than it would have been had it stayed in the EU. A cumulative loss of hundreds of billions of pounds. Money that we could be spending in our infrastructure, in our public services, on our collective defence. Now, the government ruled out any question of rejoining the EU as we went into the election last year and reopening those constitutional questions in this Parliament. It was a manifesto that I stood on and that I'm committed to. And I understand some of the reasoning behind that, and the debate of the political choice made will go on. But it does involve us remembering how painful the process was immediately after the referendum. The business uncertainty, the business anxiety, the jobs that were secure that were suddenly insecure, the investment decisions that were cancelled, the Damocles sword of unpredictability that hung over us. So I understand why there may be trepidation about reopening those questions. I'm happy to give way.
Very clearly the concerns that many have, and I'm a Brexiteer. I am proud to be a Brexiteer. We didn't get the Brexit that we voted for. Does he agree with me? Does he agree with me that the people of Northern Ireland are subject to the very same bureaucracy, high tariffs, and all the cost factors that the right honourable gentleman is outlining? And does he share my concerns as an MP from Northern Ireland, the concerns that he has for his constituents as well?
Honourable Member for his intervention, but I think he's proved the point I made before, which is it was a group of people who would never be satisfied because Brexit meant different things to different people. It was whatever illusion, whatever fantasy you wanted it to be, which is why it was so dangerous to let that nationalist genie out of the bottle in the way that we did. Now, I welcome the government's effort to reset relationships with the European Union, our neighbours and our allies, a new SBS agreement I hope will be forthcoming, supporting artists' ability to tour in the EU, mutual recognition of agreement for professional qualifications. These are all really important. A new UK-EU security pact. I mean, I do note that we would have had these things if we continued to be members of the European Union, but I welcome the government's commitment to resetting those relationships. But as members have said, let's go further. Let's look at the Youth Mobility Scheme. Let's join the Pan-Euro Mediterranean Convention and ease barriers to trade. And let's lay the groundwork for a real debate, a proper debate on where the future of this country should be, which I still wholeheartedly believe should be at a crucial moment. Yes, of course. I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a really powerful set of arguments here. In Bournemouth, we have a strong English language school sector, but it's being bashed by Brexit red tape. Now, younger people from across the continent are struggling to reach Bournemouth to get a glimpse of Britain and all that we offer. Would he agree with me that alongside a youth mobility scheme, we could consider getting rid of some of that Brexit red tape so we can actually strengthen our sector and bring younger people to Bournemouth and to Britain so they get to enjoy all of what our great country has?
Absolutely, Chair, and I think the honourable member is already proving a powerful advocate for his constituency and also for young people, and he points out again that issue of red tape and bureaucracy, which of course was the thing we were meant to be getting rid of in this amazing panacea of Brexit. So I still wholeheartedly believe in us rejoining the European Union, that being our future. I believe this is part of that process, because people need be under no illusion. This is not going away. As the petitioners and those supporting them prove, that debate is ongoing in the country, and there is strong support, as the polling evidence earlier shows, that the public believe that we made a mistake. And look at what we threw away. One of our colleagues earlier was talking about the transatlantic alliance. We had these amazing dual pillars to our place in the world, our strong position within the European Union, our amazing transatlantic alliance. We demolished one pillar, and then we've hollowed out the other because we don't have a strong enough national defence in these very, very dangerous times. And we're now in the midst of a trade war where we've deliberately left one of the most powerful trade alliances that exists. So I believe that this, as I say, is part of a journey, and I hope more people will join us on that journey, because the future of this country in terms of security, prosperity, culture, our relationship with our neighbours depends on us having these difficult discussions, recognising the mistake that we made, the fraud that was committed on the British people, and changing the course.
Manuela Pertaguela.
Thank you, Chair, and it's an honour to serve under your chairship. Thank you to the Honourable Member for Corn Valley as well for opening this debate, and to all those who signed the petition. I would like to start by declaring an interest. I am a product of the European Union project, or the European Community, as it was called then, when I came to the UK at the age of 19 as a young student from Italy, just after John Major's government signed the Maastricht Treaty. And I am immensely proud to stand here today to represent my wonderful constituency of Stratford-on-Avon. I worked as a lecturer for many years and saw firsthand the importance of collaborative research projects with our colleagues in EU universities, the positive impact of Horizon and of Erasmus+, which is the biggest program of youth opportunities in the world. Yes.
Two large universities. Not only is it an impact on students coming to the UK, it has a significant impact on the university financial sustainability as well. Does the Honourable Member agree with me that Turing does not go far enough, Erasmus does not go far enough either, and to support our universities with more students from the EU, that we can actually encourage a stronger relationship which is better than Turing, perhaps through the Youth Mobility Scheme?
I fully agree with the Honourable Member, and yet Turing is not the same as Erasmus because it's not reciprocal. So that's just one of the things that is, you know, it limits the opportunities for our students. But I just want to say as well that Erasmus Plus is not just about university exchanges. It is a program for including opportunities for our disadvantaged young people. And joining Erasmus Plus now would allow the government to better, for those young people, especially in disadvantaged areas, to have better life opportunities through exchanges, volunteering, training, school links, and so forth. So, Mr. Chair, Brexit has brought nothing but barriers for my constituents and across the United Kingdom. Small businesses are drowning in red tape and incurring new taxes and expenses, including plant and horticultural businesses. Farmers have been undercut by damaging trade deals, and by the ending of the sustainable farming incentives, which were a key part of the post-Brexit payment scheme replacing EU subsidies. Young people... Yes, I will. Thank you.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. And my honourable friend agree with me that it's not only vets and farmers who are extremely proud we've got some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world, but the British public are too, and we should not be compromising those. And these trade deals that may occur in the future should not undermine our farming standards.
Thank you, my honourable friend. Absolutely. You know, the government need to stand up for our British farmers, and that includes during negotiating trade deals that, by the way, should come to Parliament to be fully scrutinised.
Yeah.
Young people have lost opportunities to study, live, travel, work, and fall in love, like I did many years ago. Oh. And our creative industries, once thriving on European collaboration, now face restrictions and uncertainty, with artists, musicians and performers not able to tour their own continent. And a priority must be not only to rejoin Erasmus+, but also the creation of a youth mobility scheme, as many members have discussed today. We must have a credible roadmap to rebuild trust and ties with our European neighbours. We must start by deepening cooperation on climate, research, security and education, and then negotiate a new trade deal that includes a customs union to bring down the barriers holding our economy back. And ultimately, as Liberal Democrats, we want to rejoin the single market and restore the freedoms our constituents deserve. But this isn't just about trade. It's about values, opportunities, about who we are and the role we choose to play in the world. With Trump and Putin now both a threat to our security, as already mentioned by my honourable members and friends, we must stand shoulder to shoulder with our friends in the European Union. As Europe rises to defend the peace and democracy in the free world, the UK must not be a bystander. We must lead from the front, working with our European friends and allies to strengthen our shared economic prosperity and national security. Thank you.
Creasy.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Mr Mundell. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. May I congratulate the member for Colne Valley for setting out the nature of this debate so well. May I tell the member from Macclesfield that many of us who were here during the Brexit negotiations and remember the pain of those evenings, as well as the fisticuffs, know only too well that the scars cut deep. But that's why I think also Robert, and I congratulate him for his petition, needs to know the truth, because if the member for Clacton was in the country, I'm sure he would be telling all of us that we need straight talking. So let's have some straight talking about this. Brexit is a disaster. It's a disaster by anybody's metric, not least those who purported that this was somehow the hallowed land. The pandemic has spared some of the blushes of those people who still try to claim that we've got some elusive sovereignty as a result of leaving the European Union. But we can see the damage. Our constituents can see the damage. Many have already quoted some of the figures. Let me quote some more. 1.8 million fewer jobs created in the economy as a result, a number that is likely to rise to 3 million by 2035. 16,500 small businesses have stopped exporting to Europe altogether. Those of us who were on the parliamentary delegation last week had the pleasure of listening to Lord Frost trying to argue that up was down.
Sad.
But we know the truth for our constituents. We have seen the damage. We have seen that what was a bad situation in leaving the European Union was compounded by the ways in which the previous administration chose to run it. What on earth made them decide that we wouldn't even share security alerts with our colleagues in Europe? What on earth is it in the interest of British farmers to not even share food security alerts with our colleagues simply because it had the word Europe in the title? The border operating model that is adding billions of pounds to the cost of food in this country. What on earth made them think that adding £145 a time a pallet of food came over here was somehow in the interests of British consumers or indeed British businesses? And that's before we even get on to the uncertain geopolitical situation that we are in. So by any metric, it is easy to understand why Robert brought forward this petition. The Brexiteers, to me, are like those people, and we've all met them on a night out. They join your group, they start a fight in the club, they get you kicked out, but they still maintain 3 hours later, as they're walking you around in an industrial estate somewhere, which is completely empty, that somewhere they know a great club that we can still get into. The challenge for all of us who recognise the damage that has been done to this country, to our national reputation, to our economies, to our communities, and yes, to our values, to the idea that our European neighbours and friends would feel in any way unwelcome, is that we don't want to be that weirdo who turned up who thinks that, well, if we walk around the streets a few more times, we can go back and the bouncers won't recognise us and it's all fine and we can walk back in. Because the brutal reality is we have left the European Union and we owe it to people who care about this country, and I think everybody in this chamber does, actually, even whether they still purport that Brexit was a good idea or not, to talk truth to our constituents, to work out what we can actually do to salvage what can be left. And that is what this debate today is all about, because if we are honest, nobody is here actually saying that rejoin should be the sole priority of the government. And the reason they're doing that is because we know full well that when we are facing a salvage operation, Europe will only talk to us once more, again once. And who can blame them? Because for years we were like that difficult, awkward man your aunt married who turned up at Christmas and always caused a fuss, and thank God she divorced him. And now we appear acting as if nothing has changed and we should be invited to Sunday lunch. We owe respect to our colleagues in Europe when they themselves are dealing with challenges like Putin, economic uncertainty, yes, looking at what we can all do to secure peace in the Middle East. They owe it from us some respect. Sometimes, frankly, it appears as if we think our colleagues in Europe don't read our newspapers. I promise you that they do. So the challenge for all of us is to owe truth to our colleagues in Europe, truth to our constituents. It would take years to renegotiate, to rejoin the European Union, even if we were to get a fast-tracked relationship, even if they could be confident that we wouldn't change our mind again. And I absolutely recognise the public are far ahead of politicians in this debate, all of us scarred by those Brexit years. It would take years because it means going around every single individual country. It is worth remembering that our membership of the European Union was vetoed twice by France, because that's the way the process works. This is not a quick process. So those of us, and I stand here as chair of the Labour Movement for Europe, passionate about our relationship with Europe and what is possible, hold at our hearts our constituents. And our constituents need us to do what we can in the next 18 months, or else the damage that Brexit has done to this country will be so irreparable, there will be little left to negotiate. I'll happily give way.
I'm really grateful to all that my honourable friend has done on this issue. Does she agree that it would be really helpful at this point, 9 years on, that we have a comprehensive impact assessment? Because in 2016, we were talking about the projected harm that Brexit records. Now we've got the evidence. Should government prepare that so we can then make some sound judgments on the basis of that?
I don't disagree with my colleague. I just think it's so plain to see how we have cut ourselves off. Even when it came to the pandemic, even when it came to initially standing up to Putin and Ukraine, we were outside the room shouting in. I think we owe it to our constituents now to be as brutal as we can and humble as we need to be to make the case for what we can do in the next 18 months. And I just want to say a little bit about that because I'm supremely conscious about time, not least in these uncertain times. The previous administration chose to walk us out of any foreign affairs cooperation. That includes not just hard power, but soft power. So for us in the Labour Movement for Europe, there's an utter priority, absolutely, to do a defence and security cooperation agreement, but also to include aid in that conversation, because Europe is the third largest donor around the world. Whatever you think of the cuts to the aid budget, clearly duplication is a problem, but so too is separation when it comes to looking at how we can stand up to the threats that we face around the world. absolutely, as my colleagues have pointed out, we must join the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention. We frankly think these times call for moving on from talk of red lines to talking about mutual benefit. With the uncertainty of whoever is in the White House and the consistency there, our constituents need us to know that we will pursue what is a simple truth about Brexit, which is you can fight many things in life, but you can't fight geography. Of course, trade with our neighbours is always going to be important and critical to the future economy, so we must do what we can to reduce the trade barriers. Some of us were into youth mobility scheme before it was fashionable, and some of us over a year ago were arguing for it. We consider that it is absolutely in the interest of the British public to get one. We don't believe that what came back last summer was the right deal for this country, but absolutely we should be looking at what is possible. And in that conversation, we must prioritise our apprenticeships. Because I am old enough to remember when this country used to, in our national cultural life, celebrate young men from the northeast going to Germany to be able to skill and train. It was called Auf Wiedersehen Pet, and I'm sure the member from Strangford was a regular viewer of the programme. And that was absolutely youth mobility at the time. Our young people in this country did not vote for this situation. They should not bear the brunt of it. They need us to fight for every opportunity that can come for them. So a youth mobility deal, as we've already said, we've got them with other countries. They're not freedom of movement, because you can control why people come here, is in their interest if it isn't just about students. Let us talk about every young person. Let us also talk about energy. Oh, I'll happily give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. As a former Erasmus exchange student myself, with personal lived experience of the immense opportunities that youth mobility provides, does she also recognise that youth mobility not only creates immense opportunities for British students abroad and European students potentially coming to the UK, but also fundamentally that this does not rub up against the red lines that the government has set itself in the manifesto last year, and of course that it does not provide a pathway to citizenship, it is not freedom of movement, but also that it does not provide access to financial dependency on the state?
My colleague is absolutely right on all fronts. Look, a youth mobility scheme, a youth opportunity scheme with apprenticeship at the heart of it is the right thing to do. And crucially, on the timeline that I've set out about salvation for this country and salvaging something from the damage that Brexit has done, it could be achieved within that 18-month window. One final item as well to add to the list of things we could do in 18 months is about our energy security, and in particular the emissions trading scheme and the carbon border adjustment mechanism. For many of us, for our vital industries to our defence as well, including steel, it is absolutely critical that we get our CBAM, our European emissions trading schemes aligned. And Aaron Beverin told us that the language of priorities is the religion of socialism. I stand here ruthlessly prioritising the British interest, which was always being stronger and taller on the world and confident that we could work with other countries. Never more have we needed that spirit, but never more have we needed to be clear about what needs to be done when. So I recognise the passion behind this petition. I simply say to those who are petitioning this way, let us not fall into the trap that the Brexiteers have done of offering false hope when the people in this country need real change and real relationships and real solutions. The member for Clacton may not be here, but his spirit infuses our debate if we do otherwise.
Rosie Duffield.
By parliamentary standards, this may not be an enormous, huge petition. It may not have attracted almost 3 million signatures like the recent one calling for another general election, but it's still a significant one on a subject that has gone from being all we ever talked about to one we barely even mention here now. Those of us with dark red areas on the petition map will know, however, that this issue has far from disappeared from our constituents' hearts and minds. And as far as many of us are concerned, Brexit is not and has never been a done deal, never to be spoken of again. And almost 400 of my constituents have signed and written to me. From campaigning against it during the referendum to working day and night, including on the first sitting Saturday we'd had for 40 years, many of us tried and came so close to securing a less awful deal and a people's vote. Almost every Labour member met to discuss and scrutinise every stage and every amendment, led in group meetings several times a day by the current Secretaries of State for DCIT and Education, the now Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster, and Minister of State for Employment, and indeed the now Minister of State for Europe and North America.
I would love to believe that those government ministers are now applying our years of campaigning together against the damage we foresaw Brexit causing to our national security, economy and place in the world, are taking that to their new roles and raising this in cabinet and departmental meetings at every available opportunity. According to the recent YouGov survey that we've already heard mentioned, 55% of Britons now say it was wrong for the UK to leave the EU, and just 11% see Brexit as more of a success than a failure. That mirrors the referendum result in my own constituency back in 2016, where the University of Kent, our largest employer, enjoyed an extremely close working partnership with our neighbours across the English Channel. Not just on a research project basis, but we had campuses on the continent that have sadly now been closed completely. Gone too is the once proud sign which read, University of Kent, the European University. Gone are many of our friends, neighbours, academics, language teachers who made Canterbury their home for decades. The diverse demographic mix has changed. The group bookings at local restaurants, the cathedral, guest houses, tourist attractions have fallen dramatically, and our city centre just feels like a different place. Thankfully, we're a resourceful city, used to welcoming pilgrims of all kinds, and we are adjusting. But Brexit punched us heavily, Mr Mundell, and it hurt. Canterbury is closer to Europe and has more in common than we do with many UK cities, and we have such close ties in terms of so much that underlines our local economy. And as well as our social, economic and sentimental ties in East Kent, the national urgency for closer official ties couldn't be more timely, as shifting global alliances and instability are highlighted every single day. We must get closer once again to our friends and allies in the EU. And this is, of course, a political decision. It's a matter of leadership, of making the case politically and based on facts. Our trade opportunities, international standing and very security depend on us showing political leadership. This is the basic requirement of political premiers.
Will the Honourable Member give way?
Certainly.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. She talks about political leadership, and I understand that while we can all agree that Brexit has been an almost unmitigated disaster, the Labour Party manifesto said that we will not go back into the EU, and we won't do the customs union or the single market. That's a Labour Party manifesto that I stood on, that all of us over here stood on. You talk about leadership. Do you agree it's important for politicians to honour the manifesto they've stood on?
I thank the Honourable Member for intervening.
You're asking these views of.
I thank him for his intervention, but indeed there are plenty of things that the Labour government seem to be pushing through that were not on the manifesto. And the people now in charge were in fact campaigning with those of us that were still here against Brexit several years ago, so I'd like them to stick to that. So our trade opportunities, international standing and very security depend on us showing political leadership. This is the basic requirement of political premiers, taking decisions, not only tough decisions on the economy, but bold, swift, courageous decisions during shifting geopolitical circumstances. Our tourism, arts, farming, university and financial sectors need help. So it's time that this government took some of those bold decisions and acted on them, not only to reflect the will of those it represents, but also to protect and secure the best future for those generations who depend on us to deliver it. Thank you.
James Nash.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. Honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank my honourable friend for Colne Valley for opening the debate today. I rise to speak on behalf of my constituents in Rushcliffe, who have long been outward-looking, internationally minded and overwhelmingly pro-European. They understand that Brexit has not delivered the benefits promised, and they feel that the economic, social and geopolitical consequences of Brexit can be seen in their daily lives. I thank the 311 people from my constituency who signed this petition, and I also congratulate the lead petitioner for bringing this debate to this point today. The reality is clear, as so many of my colleagues have already said today. Since leaving the EU, UK trade has suffered, productivity has fallen and investment has stalled. We've heard about the OBR estimates, but I believe that Goldman Sachs actually suggests that UK GDP has fallen by an even greater amount, maybe 5% and even up to 8%, and it's lower, therefore, than it would have been without Brexit. One of my colleagues has already referenced the number of fewer jobs, 1.8 million fewer jobs created by 2023. And our small businesses, particularly sectors like agri-food and manufacturing, are bearing the brunt of new barriers to trade. And we've also heard that figure, 16,400 small businesses have ceased exporting to the EU since 2021. Now, for my constituents, these are not abstract figures. Ultimately, they translate into higher prices at the checkout, to fewer opportunities for our young people, and for all of us, a diminished global influence. However, Mr Mundell, while rejoining the EU is a goal for many in my constituency, and it's a position that I would like to see us pursue, we must be pragmatic about the challenges that that process will entail. I will.
Thank you so much, my honourable friend. I think the vast majority in this room, and certainly across my constituency of Leeds North West, have got our eyes open to the challenges of Brexit. Would my and the obstacles we've faced. Would my honourable friend agree the world has changed? What is possible for Europe, including our own country, in that new world will change too. And that new world order needs, as you were saying, I think, pragmatic and creative solutions to strengthen and protect our place in an increasingly uncertain world. Would my honourable friend agree that a new bargain in which we had access to the single market in exchange for security assurances and a mechanism for reasonable but not legally required regulatory alignment, where the benefits outweighed the costs, not with free movement, could be a route forward?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and the reality is there are several routes forward, and I think we've heard a number of them mentioned here today, and I would implore the government to be thinking creatively about the ways in which we may be able to do that, and I'll come on to a couple of my own suggestions in a moment. Rejoining would, however, be a long and complex journey. It would require unanimous agreement from all 27 EU member states, and we would need to demonstrate sustained public and cross-party support over several years. And I say this as someone who was living in Albania in 2013-2014, working for the government there, and that was at the time when Albania became an official candidate for accession to the EU. Now, that was June 2014, and 10 years on, they aren't a member. I will give way.
Anybody in this chamber, and I include the petitioners in this, are expecting the Labour Party to lead us back into the EU tomorrow. But I think what we want to hear from the Labour Party, this Labour government, is a commitment that that is its objective, that is its goal, and that's what it's going to work towards.
I thank him very much for that intervention, and it's forward movement, it's momentum that many of my constituents want to see, and I'll come on to a couple of the things that I think could be done to achieve that. Indeed, we cannot afford to wait that long to address some of the very real challenges that we are facing as a country today. There are practical, tangible steps that can be taken to help build a stronger and closer relationship with the EU. Now, many of those things have already been mentioned: negotiating a security and defence partnership to cooperate on international development and access to the EU's new €150 billion defence financing instruments. We could be reaching a veterinary agreement to reduce costly border checks. We could be joining the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention, as has been referenced. We could be aligning on emissions trading schemes with the EU to avoid some of those costly charges to UK exporters. And has again already been mentioned, exploring a youth mobility scheme for the next generation to make sure that they are able to build relationships in the way that we currently do with countries like Australia and Canada, giving young people the chance to work, study and build connections across Europe. Mr Mundell, my view is that these measures will not only strengthen our economic ties, but also restore trust and cooperation with our European partners at a time of geopolitical uncertainty. We've seen Russia's aggression continues to grow, and global challenges are significant. So closer collaboration between the UK and the EU is not just desirable, It's now essential for our security and prosperity. Now, next year, 2026, marks 10 years since the Brexit vote. I myself, I have said to many constituents on the doorstep, I can picture the newspaper columns, I can picture the TV programmes, I can picture the extensive discussion that will take place as we approach June 2026. I believe it's a perfect time for a national conversation about what our future relationship with Europe looks like, and I'm sure that many members here today will want to be part of that conversation.
For giving way, particularly on that point as we near the decade anniversary. Does he agree with me that in some senses we need to put the vote behind us and we actually need to reflect on the management of the Brexit decision? And I find it hard to believe that I will be saying this too often, but does he agree with the Leader of the Opposition, who said in her New Year's 2025 speech, "We announced that we would leave the European Union before we had a plan for growth outside the EU. Those mistakes were made because we told people what they wanted to hear first and then try to work it out later."
Yeah. I thank him for that intervention, and he's absolutely right in that the position has changed. There was a lot of mistakes, and we don't need to go to the past and examine all of that. But we will be needing a national conversation, I think, about where our relationship with Europe is in 2026. Indeed, we are having that conversation today. But there will be a natural springboard, I feel, when we're 10 years on from the vote, and I sincerely hope as a nation we take that conversation to heart. In Rushcliffe, summing up Mr Mundell, my constituents understand that Britain is strongest when it is connected, when it is cooperative, and when it's engaged with our European neighbours. They expect us as a House and this government to act decisively to help rebuild that relationship, and that is the path that we must take, and I implore the government to think creatively about the very best ways of doing that.
James McCleary.
Mr Mundell, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. This petition debate reflects just how strongly the public feel about the UK's future relationship with Europe, including the 367 signers in my own constituency of Lewis. Now, if you listen carefully, you can still hear echoes of the Tories' botched Brexit deal promises, whispers on the wind, sunlit uplands, global Britain, endless opportunities. But nearly 5 years on, after that deal came into effect, those sunlit uplands look suspiciously gloomy. Global Britain seems isolated, and the promised opportunities have become lost chances, especially for our young people. The government claims it is serious about growth, yet it continues to ignore the most impactful step we could take: a UK-EU customs union. Entering a customs union will remove mountains of red tape, eliminate cumbersome rules of origin checks, and unlock significant growth for businesses large and small. It would provide immediate relief for countless small and medium enterprises suffocating under bureaucracy and significantly boost our export to our largest and nearest market. Studies consistently show that aligning closely with European markets is overwhelmingly beneficial to British trade, employment and economic stability. In fact, a recent report from Best for Britain estimates that simply deeply aligning with the EU on goods and services could increase GDP by 1.7 to 2.2%. Why would we not want to do that? A bespoke customs union would also insulate us from Trump's irrational pro-tariff policies, which have already begun harming our economic growth. And, once achieved, we should look to join the single market, which would provide even greater opportunities for growth. Yet, instead of grasping this opportunity, the government is busy cutting welfare and slashing international aid, actions that weaken rather than strengthen our economy. When I attended the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly in Brussels last week, which the Minister for the Constitution and European Union Relations was also present at, the Assembly issued a joint statement which included the possibility of UK accession to the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention as referenced by the member for Chelsea and Fulham, the member for Macclesfield and, most recently, the member for Rushcliffe. Can I ask the Minister did you mention as well, and the member for Walthamstow, can I ask the Minister in her comments when we get them if she could confirm whether this is something the government is seriously considering, and if so, what sort of timetable they're thinking about? The Tories' botched Brexit deal has undoubtedly reduced opportunities, particularly for our youth, Young Brits can easily travel and work in Canada, Australia or Japan, yet are inexplicably blocked from France, Germany or Spain. Why? Because ideology trumps common sense. It's high time for a reciprocal youth mobility scheme with the EU, not a return to freedom of movement, but a sensible, time-limited arrangement enabling young Brits to gain invaluable experiences abroad, like they used to and like many of us grew up with. This scheme is a clear win-win, benefiting the UK and the EU. The tourism industry, for instance, once thriving with enthusiastic young Brits keen to explore and work in Europe, now faces severe labour shortages. Hospitality, retail and the arts have similarly suffered, deprived of the vibrant exchange of talent and ideas that once powered innovation and cultural enrichment. A youth mobility scheme isn't only desirable, it is an economic and strategic necessity. Just recently, representatives from our legal services sector highlighted to me the significant challenges they face without mobility for young professionals. A youth mobility scheme would allow aspiring British lawyers and other professionals to work across Europe, boosting our exports of our expertise, generating growth and enhancing Britain's reputation for excellence internationally. So again, in her comments, could the Minister clarify for me, regardless of whether it's called a youth exchange, experience or mobility scheme, I'm not too concerned about how it's branded, if the government has any plans to negotiate such an arrangement, and crucially, to treat it as a serious priority. Mr Mundell, farmers have encountered unprecedented bureaucratic obstacles when exporting to Europe, leading to a decline in overall exports in an already struggling industry. This is why we must negotiate a phytosanitary and veterinary agreement with urgency. But this deal's negative impact stretches even further. Just recently, the EU announced €150 billion for defence procurement, potentially rising to €800 billion in the coming years, funding from which the UK is completely excluded. This means billions of euros in research, innovation, high-skilled employment opportunities and global competitiveness are lost due to sheer political stubbornness.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Some of the greatest challenges facing civilization right now are climate change. How do we feed 8 billion people and give them energy sustainably? The risk of pandemics, antimicrobial resistance. Does my honourable friend agree with me that any barriers to research are not only damaging our universities and industries, but are actually hindering tackling these huge problems?
I thank my honourable friend, the member for Winchester, and yes, and my honourable friend, the member for Stratford-upon-Avon, has already touched on this at length, that those barriers are clearly harming not only the UK research environment, but the global research environment, and particularly at a time when in the United States we're seeing academics being hounded out of universities and looking for other places to take their expertise. Europe is an obvious place to go, and those sorts of arrangements could benefit our country substantially, and indeed the challenges he outlines. So, to counteract the issues around particularly defence procurement, I wonder if the Minister agrees with me that we must negotiate a UK-EU defence pact that ensures Britain remains central to collective decisions about continental security, particularly amidst Putin's barbaric war in Ukraine. Our exclusion from crucial European programmes leads directly to reduced investment, fewer high-skilled jobs and diminished international standing, precisely when unity and strength are essential. And speaking of the botched Brexit architects, where exactly is the honourable member for Clacton? According to Hansard, since his election in July, he has mentioned Brexit just twice. Surely, if this Brexit deal was the monumental success he and others promised, he'd be reminding us no end, but his silence speaks volumes. Even he seems aware that this supposed triumph is best quietly forgotten. We want to see this country back at the heart of Europe, but we must be clear-eyed about how severely the Conservatives damaged the UK's relationship with our EU partners and how long it will take to rebuild. Trump's return to the White House and his appeasement of Putin adds new urgency to this task. His aggressive trade and defence stance reminds us of just how crucial our European ties are, not just economically, but strategically. Our real strength comes from unity and partnership. Together, as a part of a larger European community, we wield far greater influence, command substantially more resources and drive innovation more effectively than when we are standing alone. Shared European cooperation amplifies our ability to fund ambitious research and development, enhance collective security and promote our shared liberal democratic values globally. Far from diminishing our sovereignty, collaboration with Europe expands and reinforces it. Mr Mundell, the government must move beyond cherry-picking and timid gestures and take a bold, strategic stance in its approach to Europe, one grounded in realism, ambition and the national interest. Its self-defeating red lines are holding our country back. The government claims that it will do whatever it takes for economic growth. That must surely include ditching their nonsensical red lines. British jobs, businesses and our international influence and our young people's future depend on constructive engagement, not stubborn isolation. It is time for the government to swallow its pride, acknowledge reality and begin rebuilding the bridges that the Tories so recklessly burned. Let's ensure future generations inherit opportunities and cooperation, not barriers and isolation. Our young people deserve better. Our small businesses and our farmers deserve better. Britain deserves better. Thank you.
Yeah.
Steve Witherden.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Mundell. And can I thank my honourable friend, fellow Welshman, the member for Colne Valley, for securing this important debate. Wales' agricultural sector is at the heart of our social fabric, employing over 50,000 people. It is central to our economy, our food security and the preservation of our stunning countryside. Yet, since Brexit, our farmers have faced severe challenges. Brexit has undoubtedly created significant challenges, particularly in terms of trade relations. The EU was and remains a critical trading partner for Wales, with a substantial 75% of Welsh food and drink exports destined for the trading bloc. However, a report from the Centre of Inclusive Trade Policy revealed that UK food and agricultural exports to the EU have dropped by over 16% on average since we left the EU single market, which equates to a staggering £3 billion less in exports annually. The introduction of border checks for agri-food products and regulatory hurdles has made it increasingly difficult for Welsh farmers to compete on a level playing field. These changes have led to higher costs, delays and uncertainty, making it harder to maintain smooth supply chains, something that particularly affects our smaller businesses. Moreover, Brexit's impact on labour shortages in the UK food industry has been severe, with a significant proportion of workers in the agri-food and meat sectors coming from the EU. The reduced availability of workers has created operational challenges and pushed up production costs, further straining the financial stability of Welsh farms. Additionally, there remains ongoing uncertainty about the future of subsidy structures and support mechanisms. The lack of clarity on agricultural policies across the UK has made Wales less attractive for inward investment, leaving businesses uncertain about what lies ahead. The Tories have let down our farmers time and time again, signing disastrous trade deals with Australia and New Zealand, forcing over 12,000 farmers and agribusinesses out since 2010 and mishandling the Brexit negotiations. Their failures have deepened the financial struggles of Welsh farmers, and we must learn from these mistakes. We must rebuild trust, repair the damage caused by rushed trade deals and fight for a fair and competitive post-Brexit trading environment. So I ask the Minister what considerations have been made for constituents like mine in Montgomeryshire and Glyndŵr who rely heavily on a free, stable and healthy agricultural sector in the government's commitment to reset the UK's relationship with the European Union. Thank you.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. It's a pleasure to serve under you. I want to congratulate the petitioners for securing this debate, and also thanks to the member for Colne Valley for his eloquent and passionate speech. Now, I fear, Mr Mundell, that I'm in danger of picking at the scars and the wounds that was referred to by the honourable member and the very learned member for Walthamstow. But I must reflect on these last 9 years, I'm afraid. On the 23rd of June 2016, the people of Scotland voted to remain within the European Union by 62% to 38%. There was a majority for remain in every single one of Scotland's local authorities. That, in anybody's terms, was decisive. If the vote were rerun today, Mr Mundell, I suggest it would be even more decisive. In the almost 9 years since the disastrous misleading of the electorate by Gove, Johnson and Farage et al., you might want to consider to what extent this failure of democracy has increased support for Scottish independence from 45% to 54% and rising. But, still in all, democracy has been undermined in Scotland because the imposition of the Internal Market Act in 2020 restricted the previously agreed powers of the Scottish Parliament, ignored the Sewell Convention by proceeding with UK legislation without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. And as a result of Brexit, we are a much poorer nation at a time when we cannot afford to be poorer. That poverty equates to £3 billion in lost public revenues for Scotland each and every year since we left Europe. And we face a continuing cost. I will.
Thank him for giving way. And he's right to talk about the economic impact of Brexit, of course. But would it have been different if a vote had been won around us joining the customs union, a vote which the SNP abstained on?
Well, I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I can't comment as I wasn't here at the time, but we'll come back to the issue of the customs union in a moment. The UK has endured the highest rate of inflation in the G7 for many months. Brexit has exacerbated the cost of living crisis, driving a £250 increase in annual household food bills. Food and drink inflation in 2023 was at a 45-year high, with food prices up by almost 25 percentage points between 2019 and 2023. Analysis suggests that a third of that increase is due to Brexit, meaning UK households have paid out almost £7 billion to cover the extra costs of overcoming trade barriers that make importing food from the EU harder. No community has escaped, but inevitably it's our poorest families that are hurting the most. Our business community are also enduring increased costs and damaged trade. According to a Scottish Government analysis, 44% of businesses in Scotland are facing difficulties, trading overseas and named Brexit as the main cause. They face significant additional costs and bureaucracy at a time when their margins are already being squeezed at home by decisions made here in Westminster. Our prized seafood industry has been hit with an estimated 50% increase in the cost of packaging items sent to the EU, and new export health certificates are costing the salmon sector alone approximately £1.3 million per year. I will, of course.
I'm sure he'll join me in the dismay that the industry of bivalve fishing, no longer the waters for whales are acceptable, and that industry died with Brexit.
I thank the member for the point she's made. Our fishing industry has effectively lost quota share and has access to fewer fishing opportunities for some species than it had under the EU's common fisheries policy. That includes, for example, North Sea whiting, where the maximum percentage of total EU and UK quota available is 73.5% compared to average UK landings in 2015 to 2019 of 82%. Even where quota has been gained through the TCA, much of it is for species that the Scottish fleet does not generally catch or does not want to catch, making it of little practical value. In the wider seafood sector, some shellfish exporters have estimated that the new barriers to trade with the EU have resulted in an additional cost of £500 to £600 per consignment, making some exports unviable. Seafood Scotland has described post-Brexit labour shortages as having a huge impact on the seafood processing sector, with businesses turning down growth opportunities due to a lack of labour. We no longer enjoy freedom of movement. It has gone despite the promises of the then candidate for the leader of the Labour Party in 2020, a certain Keir Starmer. 45% of tourism businesses in the Highlands and Islands have reported staff shortages, forcing otherwise successful firms to cut their opening hours. In July 2022, UK Hospitality reported 40,000 hospitality vacancies in Scotland, but the sector is excluded from the UK Government's seasonal worker scheme. Recent media reported one hotel in the Highlands alone short of 70 staff for the busy summer season. Now, the Prime Minister recently told me in response to an oral question that he was fully aware of these labour shortages and he was working to address them. And I have two questions for the Minister in our wind-up today. Can she first of all address exactly how the Prime Minister is working to address those shortages? Travel is more difficult and more costly. Brexit has slowed down the process of entering the EU on a British passport, with business travellers and holidaymakers reporting long delays at some airports and extremely long tailbacks at the port of Dover. Pets can only be brought into the European area with an animal health certificate, which in turn must be issued by a vet and can cost between £100 and £300 per trip. Most mobile phone operators have also reintroduced roaming charges, which were abolished for EU members in 2017. Perhaps most shamefully, our young people miss huge opportunities as a result of Brexit. And many members have already referred to the fact that we are no longer participating in Erasmus+. So, in summary, Mr. Chair, our democratic will is being ignored. We are poor. The cost of living is climbing. Business is suffering. We don't have enough workers. Foreign travel is more difficult and more expensive, and our young people have lost enormous opportunity. History will reserve an especially harsh judgment on those who misled us down this path. And now, paradoxically, we are forced into closer defence spending and relationships with our European allies to face the growing threat of Russian aggression. But then don't say you weren't warned that the creation of the European Union was a bulwark for peace in Europe since 1945, and that its weakening would potentially threaten that peace. So in conclusion, Chair, I ask the question we should all ask. Who really benefited from Brexit? It certainly wasn't the ordinary people. So rather than speak about how bad this all is, let's do something about it. I feel a teeny wee bit sorry for the Chancellor at the minute, but I'm giving her a way out. Rejoin the single market, rejoin the customs union and get the benefits that offers. Thank you.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under you today. And I noticed you've got younger just in the last few minutes. Hopefully it's orderly to flatter the Chair. I'd like to thank my honourable friend from Colin Valley for opening the debate so ably, and also for the many people in Edinburgh South West who signed this petition. I'll speak briefly because what I was going to talk about has been well tread. But Brexit has been an absolute tragedy for the UK, both economically and culturally. And I think the Conservatives have taken a share of the blame today, along with Reform and its predecessor parties. But I do have to be honest and say that when I think about the Brexit and how close it was, I do think about my party's leadership at that time and think that more could have been done. So some blame certainly should be shared there. So I came to this place from higher education last July, so I do want to speak about the impact of Brexit on that sector quite briefly. So I do so within the context of my register of interests. And I should also mention that Patrick Thompson from Strathclyde University is shadowing me today, which largely involves drinking coffee when I drink coffee so far. So in higher education, Brexit has been problematic. We now have fewer students coming from the EU into Scottish universities. And primarily that's not a money issue. That's about the diversity of thought within the classroom. And that is a real problem, and it leaves us all poorer. It's harder for universities to attract staff from the EU now, and if we're serious about growing the economy, we have to have the best staff from around the world in our universities, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that. In fact, I can remember when we were going through the Brexit process, EU nationals were leaving universities and going back to Europe, which is a tragedy, and we should be ashamed of that. And research funding from within the EU has got harder. I know this has improved slightly recently, but again, I can remember during the process it was difficult to build consortiums if you had a UK lead, and some partners were even worried about having UK universities within their consortiums, and so we shouldn't overlook the impact of that. So these problems only amplify the wider economic problems that Brexit has imposed on the economy, and it's felt more inside our university sector. So I am pleased that the current government is trying to rebuild relationships with Europe and try to get as close as possible. And I do think and hope that if we are doing that, and if we are looking for trailblazers, that should be within our universities, because I think there's much more that can be done to rebuild those relationships. So I do support this petition about rejoining the EU as soon as possible, but it's a matter of what as soon as possible means. We've heard the member for Walthamstow explain that could be many years of harmonisation, which is a real challenge for us. But the bigger challenge is the division and acrimony that comes with referendums, because we need a referendum to go back in. I've lived through the Scottish independence referendum and also the Brexit referendum. Both these referendums divided our communities and were toxic in many respects. They divided families, they divided workplaces, and they even divided households, which is incredible. So I do think that we have to build the case right now if we're going to start building the case now if we're going to avoid that situation again. Make those positive arguments for rejoining the EU, and I think we should start making them from within universities, because that's where international collaboration works best. And I also think people weren't wrong to vote for Brexit, but I think they were misled, so we have to be honest with them about that and explain to them why things haven't unfolded as they were promised by others, people who are not in this room today, who should be owning up to the tragedy they created. So we have to be honest with them, we have to be frank, we have to be transparent, but we have to lead this debate. And hopefully, after the next election, we can build up to that referendum to rejoin. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to thank the honourable member for Colne Valley and for tabling this debate, and to everybody who signed it. We all know by now that thanks to the Conservatives and their allies in reform, the relationship between the UK, Wales and the EU has been severely damaged. Falling out with our neighbours is particularly self-defeating during this fracturing era of global politics. And Wales is paying a particularly heavy price for that fraying relationship. We are a nation of manufacturers, a nation of small businesses, a nation of farmers. And those three sectors have been throttled by red tape, hindering our trade with the European Union. In my constituency, a small local business in Radnorshire that makes parts for classic motorcycles is heavily reliant on EU trade. And yet, over Christmas, with no warning or communication from the Department for Business and Trade, they were just told that they were now incompatible with EU directives. And that's just one example of how Brexit-related bureaucracy is harming businesses and damaging trade with our neighbours. Farmers and the food and drink industry across Wales are also waiting for the long-promised UK veterinary agreement. Studies show that such an agreement could boost UK agri-food exports to the EU by at least 22%, providing a vital boost to rural areas like mine. Yet we've still received no timeline from the current Labour government on when that is likely to happen. And it's not just the economic impact, though. It's the cultural and social loss for young people too. I thank my good fortune that I had the opportunity to live and study at Leiden University in the Netherlands. Those sort of opportunities broaden horizons and contribute to growth. One of the cruelest and most short-sighted decisions by the previous government was pulling us out of the Erasmus programme. In Wales, the Liberal Democrats stepped up to reverse the damage. Former Education Minister Kirsty Williams introduced the Tithe Exchange programme, which, unlike its English counterpart, has been praised for ensuring accessibility for students from less privileged backgrounds. Ultimately, the Liberal Democrats want to see the UK back at the heart of Europe,
rejoining Erasmus, tearing down trade barriers and signing a youth mobility scheme with our EU counterparts, something the Labour government has so far refused to do. The arc of human progress should ensure that older generations pass on more opportunities to younger generations than the ones that they have themselves enjoyed. And we're living in a time when that arc of progress has gone into reverse. And us pro-Europeans must now win the argument for a stronger EU with Great Britain at its heart. And on that point, I'm concerned to hear the word pragmatic used several times in this debate, because it sounds like pragmatic reasons are being given as excuses for not making more progress in terms of rebuilding our relationship with the EU. And we should be concerned, I think, about talking about pragmatism and solely in rational language, because we know that those arguments failed miserably in 2016, when arguments were built as to why we should stay in the European Union just based on solely rational economic language. The EU is a pragmatic project, but at its core, it's also an idealistic one. It's a project grounded in ideals, grounded in the idea that the nations of Central Europe should never go to war again. And it succeeded in that mission, making it one of the most successful political projects ever in mankind's history. So when we're making the argument of why we should be rejoining the European Union, let's use the language of idealism, not just rationalism, because unless we build a case for the for the UK to rejoin the EU based on idealist languages and get people to buy into the ideals on which the European Union was founded, we won't have a long-term buy-in to the project from the people we need to convince.
Yeah. Jim McAllister. Jim.
That's me. Name's Alistair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir John. I'm afraid my contribution will jar with the cosy consensus of this debate, if we should call it a debate, because has it not just been an echo chamber for the laments of 2 or 3 dozen Europhile MPs? It hasn't been a debate at all. But what brings us here is 130,000 odd signatures on a petition. Well, of course, what that immediately calls to mind is the contrast with the 17,410,742 British voters who made the most consequential decision in the greatest democratic decision ever made by the greatest number of people ever voting. And of course, that embarrasses those. That's why almost 2 hours into this debate, that's the first time we've heard that figure, because those in this chamber today have their face set against that democratic decision. And of course, this petition is notable, that it is in its arrogance. It doesn't even say, well, let's have another referendum. No, in its arrogance, it demands that we simply rejoin the EU that the British people decided democratically to leave. Now, I know that's an uncomfortable fact, but that is the core issue here.
Will the member give way?
Yes, I'm glad to give way.
I thank the member for giving way. He speaks of uncomfortable facts. Has he been listening to the uncomfortable facts that have been shared in this chamber here today?
Well, let me give the honourable member and some others some rather uncomfortable facts. And for those Euro fanatics who gather in this hallowed hall today, I'm delighted to tell you that only 50 of my constituents in North Antrim signed this petition. And of course, that's for very good reason. Because unlike the rest of you, we have continued to have to live under the EU. We have continued to have to be subject to the bureaucratic stranglehold of the EU's single market and of its customs code. And what has that meant? That has meant, in the circumstance of Northern Ireland, that in over 300 areas of law, over 300 areas of law, we are governed by laws we don't make and can't change because they're made by a parliament, a foreign parliament, in which we have no say. That is the product. That is the product of the denial of Brexit to the people of Northern Ireland. That is how we've been left. And of course, those are the laws that govern the single market. And I hear the moving desire of you all to be back in the single market. Well, let me tell you what it has meant for Northern Ireland to be in the single market. We have been told it was the best of both worlds. We were told what a panacea if only we all had the best of both worlds. Well, let me tell you what that has meant for Northern Ireland. Being the best of both worlds, being able to sell into that mighty market of the EU was supposed to be that which would bring a flood of foreign direct investment into Northern Ireland. We were going, according to some of the enthusiasts, to be the Singapore of the West. Well, I have to tell you, there has not been one foreign direct investment into Northern Ireland because of the single market access. That, in a moment, that is the reality. So before you get what you wish for, I just caution you that being in the single market is no panacea. And of course, it comes in Northern Ireland at the price I've already illustrated. The fact that we must be governed by laws we don't make and can't change. And you all now seem, well, the 2 dozen of you are here, seem to want to put the whole United Kingdom in that position. And I've heard people lament about tariffs from America. But you want to put yourselves in the club that will be the most tariffed from the United States. Where is the logic of that? It really is beyond belief. But the real lesson out of Northern Ireland is this. The growth in our economy has come from the services sector. And that is the sector which is outside EU control. So of the 2 sectors, the manufacturing and all of that, and the services sector, the sector that has grown is the one outside the control of the EU. The one that's still under the control of the EU is the one that has struggled and has not grown. And that, I think, is a telling reminder of what it means to subjugate yourself in a subservient way to rules that are made in a foreign parliament. Yes, I'll give way.
And he's right, many of us feel desperately sad about the position that Northern Ireland was put in as a result of Brexit. I hate to tell him, but actually the services sector, because Northern Ireland is still both in this position, because of the value of the Good Friday Agreement, is included in Northern Ireland. But I just want to ask him, because he made much stir there of the 50 people who deigned to sign the petition from his constituency and dismissing those people who might be supportive of having a relationship with the European Union. What does he say to the 693,525 voters in Northern Ireland, the majority of them, who voted to remain? In this debate, there are many contentions thrown around, but he also thought numbers matter.
Well, 2 things. The honourable member is wrong that services are under the Protocol Windsor framework. They are not. They are free from it. So she is just simply wrong about that. On the question of Northern Ireland voted in favour of remaining, so what? That was not the vote. That was not the question on the ballot paper. The question on the ballot paper was, should the United Kingdom leave? And you might as well say, as you titter and congratulate each other, You might as well say, well, didn't London vote to remain?
That's true.
So what? It was a national vote. It wasn't about how the regions voted, because the question on my ballot paper, as on yours, Mr. Chairman, was, did I want the United Kingdom to leave or to stay? That was the question. My only regret is that for my part of the United Kingdom, we weren't delivered the Brexit that was voted for. Thank you.
Fred Thomas. No longer here. Okay, right. Let's have Vera Hobhouse then, please.
And I want to congratulate all the petitioners who brought this important debate to this chamber. Over 400 signatures came from my constituents alone, and I do believe democracy is when we debate these important issues. And today is the first start of a very, very important debate, and I hope the government will listen. Let me say this to the petitioners in the first place. I was fighting to the last to stop Brexit. I was shocked and grieving when we left in January 2020. And I took it almost as a personal failure that we couldn't stop Brexit. And I would be the first to agree that Brexit isn't working, and we have heard all this afternoon why it isn't working. I'm also, like my wonderful friend, the MP, the Member of Parliament for Stratford-upon-Avon, I'm a European product. I wouldn't be here without the EU. I'm German by birth and origin. I met and married my British husband, and I became a British citizen. And I was 30 then, and for the last 35 years, I've tried to get rid of my German accent. But through all those many years, I've always been a European at heart, and that heart was somewhat taken out of me. But through my scars, incomprehension, and shock, I have come to understand that looking back is not an option now. We must find new ways of engagement and a new language of defining our relationship with the European Union. And yes, pragmatic, I think we have to be realistic and we have to be honest with our constituent. What I expect from our government is not to look backwards, but I echo what has been said this afternoon, to define what a reset of our relationship is going to lead to. And from our part, from the Liberal Democrats, we always believe that reset, the end journey, should be to be at the heart of the European Union once more. Last week, I was in Brussels as a member of the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, as a number of other friends and colleagues in this chamber as well. The Parliamentary Partnership Assembly is the only formal body by which UK parliamentarians actually engage with EU parliamentarians. And this is what I heard from our European friends. The TCA is the most comprehensive and wide-ranging trade agreement that the EU has with any other third country. And that is something that we need to also hear. It is the most wide-ranging and most comprehensive trade agreement that we have, because we are an ex-member and no other country has gone out of the European Union. Most want to ascend. But it is important to recognise that the EU is actually quite happy with the TCA. They are not necessarily wanting to open the discussion, and we here can, of course, theorise and test how far the TCA can go, but we have to recognise that currently the EU sees the TCA as something that they're quite happy with. What they do want to engage with, and that's what they say, their main concerns is people-to-people contact, a sustainable energy future, and security and resilience. And I would like to take each one of them. People-to-people contact, mainly what they have been proposing is a youth mobility scheme. And we Liberal Democrats are absolutely, and we're first out of the box to say, yes, we should agree to that. And I don't think it is helpful if the government says that a youth mobility scheme is a return to free movement. It isn't. So we have to look at what a youth mobility scheme can realistically look like. And while I recognise, because I tried that in the last Parliament as well, to look at whether we could go back to something like Erasmus+, that would cost the government a lot of money. I can't see that happening just now. But what we could look at, because Turing exists, and if you look at Turing and the ambitions of Turing, which is not just about students, but also apprenticeship and other exchanges with young people, but it is only accessible to British citizens. And therefore, whether Turing is an opportunity to make that reciprocal, and I urge the government to at least look at that, because that would be a way forward and a way towards making some sort of movement towards the European Union. The other one is, of course, is our security, is our energy security arrangements. And there I want to say two things. Currently, so energy security is a shared concern for both. Absolutely, the European Union wants to engage on energy security. But the current system with which we trade our energy is not working. It was set up as part of the TCA, and it's called something very complicated, multi-region loose volume coupling, and it has to be replaced by something that is a lot more ambitious as a sort of a price coupling model that we currently have. And this is particularly important if we want to draw in the vital private investment to realise the huge potential of the North Sea as our shared clean power plan. And again, I urge the government to at least look at the way we are trading our energy. It would have big advantages, not just for UK citizens, but also for EU citizens, and the EU is open to these discussions. Another issue is, of course, ETS, so the way we trade emissions. And again, I do not expect the government to ultimately follow entirely a European model, but we need to align as far as possible. And my last point would be on security. Obviously, it is in our shared interest to protect and defend Europe. When we were talking about security cooperation, someone from the European side said, oh, we have to look whether this needs a new legal framework. And I would say, well, if the European Union talks about new legal frameworks, that's probably not the pragmatic and realistic solutions that we are looking for. But I agree with my friend, the member for Tunbridge Wells, that unless we find ways of how we are actually securing security procurement and how we are working together on the supply chains of how we are making sure that that defence system, our defence systems are working together and where we produce what, then again, our reset of the relationship is just warm words. And therefore, to conclude, Sir John, what I urge the government is to move away from just warm words. In the PPA, we all said yes, and the relationship and the words that has been exchanged are very warm, and there's a new relationship. We must move away from warm words to actual action and results, because otherwise we keep talking about a reset for many, many decades. We need to have some action from the government now.
Wishart.
Thank you ever so much. It's a pleasure to be chairing this afternoon. I've listened very carefully to all of the speeches today, some fine, some perhaps not so fine. And I have to say, I'm not entirely too sure exactly where we are. I don't know what to make of this at all, and I'm really confused, and I'm hoping that maybe in the sum-up speeches I'll be helped and assisted a little bit to get a better understanding about where this House is. Because I heard this government throughout the whole general election saying the only thing that was important about the EU was the red lines. It was all about not joining the single market, not joining the customs union, and that was about it. Then, as the months went on, we started to hear about this reset, and I thought, okay, let's examine this a little bit. What does this mean? What are we going to get from this reset? And what we find, not very much. I think reset to this government is the EU doing this government some sort of favour to sort of mitigate some of the impacts of Brexit without the government giving anything back in turn. And people have raised touring musicians and youth mobility scheme. Now, these are two issues that I'm particularly well associated with. I don't know if I mentioned it before, Mr Hayes, but I was a former rock musician in the day and toured Europe extensively. I've probably not said that to you at all, but that was the case. And these are related because there was a negotiation that started to happen within the EU. And there was a sense that in return for offering a youth mobility scheme to Europe, we would secure the rights for our artists to once again tour freely within the European Union. That would be some sort of creative passport and visa given to our bands so they could once again get the pleasure of playing within the European Union. That was rejected out of hand. They weren't interested. And the last word from the government when it comes to a youth mobility scheme is we do not have plans for a youth mobility agreement. So what I want to say to my Labour members and friends in this debate today, and I'm encouraged by their enthusiasm for the European Union. I'm actually taking heart from the fact that they're starting to talk about the single market and customs union again. And I say this sincerely to them. Go for it. Please go for it. You're our only hope. Yes.
I thank the gentleman for giving way, but the suggestion we go for it in terms of the custom union, I think he was one of the MPs that abstained when he had that chance. Yeah. And it's a great mystery in Scottish politics, Mr Chairman, about why it was that the SNP abstained. Can you explain that? Can you explain that?
I can't really believe that we're still debating it right. What happened that day, and this is the final word on this for the honourable gentleman, he wasn't there, I was there. The vote that went forward was for a customs union, not the customs union. And it was a proposition that was unacceptable to us and several colleagues across this House. So let's deal with that myth. So once that's out of the way, Mr Hayes, let's get back to them again. Because that is a disappointing intervention. Because I'm actually praising them. I'm saying that there's hope at last for those of us that want to return to the European Union. And I think that's great. But can I remind some of the Labour members what this petition actually says?
About getting away with that. So that's a good exchange, but let's do continue.
What the petition actually says is to apply for the UK to join the EU as a full member as soon as possible. Now, there's two key parts of that passage. One is as a full member, and the second part, as soon as possible. It doesn't ask for a positive and good reset. It asks for the UK to rejoin the EU. And this is the sort of territory that we must start to get back into once again. And it's only going to come from Labour members. They've got such a huge majority that it's not going to make much difference if we all got together and ensured that we could have a collective voice for this. It has to come. So I want to encourage them to pursue this, to keep on taking this to their government, to argue with a passion and conviction that they want to see the UK back into the European Union once again. That's the only thing that I think will satisfy the petitioners, because that is what they want. And somebody said that the public's way ahead of this House and all that, and they're absolutely right. 60% of the UK public now want the UK to rejoin the European Union. And we should be looking at what the people of the UK want. Now, it would be immensely popular if a party, one of the parties, just one of them, were to say we are utterly, totally committed to full EU membership. That would be going with the grain of public opinion throughout the United Kingdom. And once again, I say to Labour members that, you know, like, this economic growth has been pretty hard to find. They've not been able to do much in the course of the past few months. We've got another reset coming up on Wednesday when it comes to the economic conditions of this country. Brexit would unlock massive... Addressing Brexit and rejoining the single market would unlock massive investment for the United Kingdom and would get us back on our feet once again. That is where the economic growth could come from. And they've got to look at this as a way forward and address some of the difficulties that they've managed to find themselves in economically just now. But I'm genuinely encouraged, Mr Hayes, because I think that we have now got a group of Labour members of Parliament that I think are sincere in their desire to rejoin the European Union. Now, I say to them, it doesn't have to happen tomorrow, it doesn't have to happen next year or in the next Parliament. But what they have to say today is that it's our intention as a government to rejoin the European Union as a full member of that union. That is what the petitioners have been asking for. That's what they want. And if I've got it correctly, they want it as soon as possible.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon, and I'd like to congratulate Robert Master on creating this petition and thank the 330 residents of my constituency of South Devon who signed it, putting us in the top 5% in the country. So 5 years ago, I gave my final speech in the European Parliament as leader of the Liberal Democrat group of MPs and MEPs. And in that speech, I described Brexit as a backward step and a vanity project that has no basis in reality. And I would like to say that I think the absence of all members of Reform UK, all 4 of them currently, and all of the Conservatives as well. The fact that none of them are in this chamber today to defend, apart from the Shadow Minister, obviously. Yes, very bravely sitting there on his own. The fact that none of them are here in the chamber today to defend Brexit, I think, speaks volumes. Leaving the European Union was a significant moment, leaving a union of nations that was established to promote peace on our continent and which had seen the dismantling of barriers between nations and had enabled trade and cultural ties to flourish. What the European Union has achieved in terms of international cooperation is second to none in the world, and I still believe that we are stronger together and that as a small island nation we played a much bigger part on the international stage as one of the key members of that union. Now, nobody wants to revisit the division and toxicity of the Brexit debate that dominated our national discourse for years, and I do understand the hesitation of the government to even go there. But we mustn't forget that that debate was fuelled by misinformation and outright lies about what leaving the European Union would mean for the UK. It was ultimately a playground rivalry between two of our former Prime Ministers played out on the national stage, with one side never really believing that they would win, and the other not preparing the ground for what would be a seismic shift in the way we do business and trade with our nearest neighbours. I still believe that leaving the EU was one of the worst decisions this country has made, and it is what brought me into politics. So having sat in this Parliament as a member for almost exactly the same amount of time as I sat in the European Parliament, I can honestly say that the democratic deficit is not in Brussels. As an opposition MP here, I believe I have less influence over decisions that will affect the people and the economy of my constituency than I did as a member of the European Parliament. And a government elected by just 1 in 3 voters in this country has secured the biggest majority, aside from 1997, since the Second World War. Yet it has chosen to set itself red lines around our relationship with the European Union, which are continuing to thwart growth, hamper economic development, and curtail the opportunities of our young people, all of which I believe are unnecessary and deeply damaging to the standing and prosperity of the UK. And I believe there is a fundamental misunderstanding, or possibly a willful ignorance, by those in government as to what the British public really want now. Take Brixham as an example. In my constituency, Brixham is one of the major fishing ports in the UK, a place where the community believed the lies they were told about what Brexit would mean for the fishing industry. And when campaigning in Brixham over the last couple of years, I lost count of the number of people who told me that they had been lied to and who felt cheated by Brexit. People who would never have wanted to elect a Liberal Democrat who had worn the yellow T-shirt with the Stop Brexit slogan back in 2019. And they went out to vote for me last year because they are so angry at what they see as a betrayal of their trust. Just last week, along with many colleagues here, I returned... I will give way.
I can't resist, Mr. Chairman. She's saying that people were so angry that they voted Lib Dem.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. People vote Lib Dem for lots of reasons, but maybe they don't think we'll betray them in the same way that the Conservatives did. So just last week I returned to the European Parliament as part of the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. And while there, I heard our Cabinet Minister refer to research by Aston University, which showed that exports to the European Union have fallen by 27% since Brexit. For a government that wants growth, that figure alone should be enough to change their attitude. This is no surprise if you talk to some of the businesses in my constituency of South Devon. One shellfish exporter who tells me they have to have 17 pieces of paper signed by a vet for every consignment of mussels they export to the EU, making it impossible to trade efficiently with their biggest customer and hampering growth in their business. A small household product retailer which has had to end trade with all EU customers because of the new GPSR regulations. Delicatessens who are struggling to cope with the red tape involved in importing smaller shipments of wine and food for the UK, the kind of regulations that only big suppliers are able to manage, and I'm sure that's repeated right across the country. And a precision engineering company whose exports have been badly affected by Brexit red tape. On and on it goes.
But apart from the impact on trade, the opportunities for our young people are being severely curtailed by Brexit, and I won't revisit all the arguments that several members have put forward in this debate today. But just to say that it is a tragedy that our children and grandchildren will not have the chances that we had, so many of us had, to go to Europe, to develop skills, cultural understanding, language skills, and to bring all of that experience back to the UK. It's high time the government agreed a youth mobility scheme with the EU, and last week I welcomed the PPA agreement, which said the government understood the need to establish a youth opportunity scheme, including apprenticeships. We all understand the need. Let's hope the government will go further than that and address the need. In so many ways, our country has been impoverished by Brexit, economically, culturally and politically. And I'm sure I'm not the only one to be absolutely demoralised by the millions of hours of negotiations that took us out of the European Union, and now potentially the millions more that will go into negotiating piecemeal, bit-by-bit replacements for all the benefits that we lost. Yeah, I will go.
Thank you very much, being very generous with your time. On that point about the many, many hours being taken to renegotiate, to change our deal, to get potentially the customs union access, and then we'll hear talk from the government about cutting waste in Whitehall. The irony that the additional burden put on Whitehall on civil servants due to Brexit is now being spoken about as this burden that we need to get rid of. Does she have a suggestion on something that they could potentially do to reduce the workload for Whitehall civil servants towards the European Union?
Well, I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and if it were that easy, then I'm sure at the stroke of a pen they could get rid of all that red tape. Sadly, I don't think it is that straightforward. It's not just the hours that were wasted in all those negotiations, but the cost of it. The cost of all those civil servants' time is just unimaginable. And I do appreciate the scars borne by members who served through those years, as referenced by the member for Walthamstow. But I don't actually agree with her that we shouldn't revisit our intentions, given the clear evidence we now have of the disaster that Brexit has been. The Conservative government wrecked the UK's relationship with Europe. The current Labour government says it wants a reset, but no one I spoke to in Brussels last week on the European side was clear what that really means. Fixing our broken relationship with Europe is clearly the most obvious way to boost our economy, providing much-needed funding to fix our public services. The single biggest thing we can do to turbocharge our economy in the medium and long term would be to form a customs union with the EU, tearing down the trade barriers and shredding the red tape that is holding us back. We must fix our trading relationship first to grow our economy and protect Britain from Trump's trade war. The Liberal Democrats have always believed that we are stronger as part of Europe. It is a long road back, and thanks to the Conservatives, it will take a long time to rebuild trust. But we owe it to future generations to make it happen. Sadly, I think it's probably too early to campaign to rejoin the EU right now. It's not even an option on the table. But we must take concrete steps towards it, rather than just repeating meaningless warm words to start rebuilding the shattered relationship. And to answer the petitioner's question, should the UK rejoin the EU, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, yes, I believe we should. Thank you.
You took my prompt. Well done. Clive Jones.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir John, and I thank the honourable member for Colne Valley for securing the debate, and for Robert and others for originating the petition. Brexit is an issue that continues to shape the future of our economy. Way back in 2016, promises were made, promises that our departure would lead to a stronger, more prosperous economy, promises made by the likes of Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg and the current member for Clacton. Yet today we stand here confronting the harsh reality that these promises have not been fulfilled. Instead, costs go up and supply chains are disrupted. Research from the London School of Economics concludes that leaving the EU reduced the value of our goods exports by an estimated £27 billion in 2022. £27 billion, a sum so large that it would plug the black hole created by the Conservatives' mismanagement of the economy, and you'd still have enough money left to build 2.5 Royal Berkshire hospitals by the side of my constituency. This very same study found that an estimated 14% of firms had previously exported to the EU. They had now stopped. I know of one business who exported over £500,000 worth of product to the EU. The business stopped straight after Brexit. The business to the EU stopped straight after Brexit. Recently, the owners told me that they had got the business back. This was seemingly good news. But I asked what the profit margin was on this new business that they had taken several years to get back. Absolutely shot away, said the owner of the business. Nothing like it before. That is one of the damages of Brexit. These are losses that are felt by real people in our communities. Our small businesses have been left to suffer the most from the Conservatives' legacy of creating trade barriers that are so expensive to overcome.
Will the Honourable Member give way on that voice?
I will.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. He talks about ridiculous trade barriers, which we've heard a lot of today. Myself and other members of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee were in Dover seeing the preparations that the previous government made on trade barriers, particularly around agricultural products coming into the UK, and were shocked to discover at Bastion Point a £20 million facility built that will never be used. Doesn't that exemplify Tory incompetence?
It certainly does. They certainly know how to easily waste £20 million. They showed us they were very, very good at doing that. It is shocking. An estimated near 2 billion extra, a near 2 billion additional pieces of paper up to the end of 2023 have had to be filled out by British exporters since 2001 as a result of leaving the EU. From export declarations to transit declarations, origin certificates and other documents with obscure acronyms. It's a Gordian knot of red tape. It is a figure so large that if all 2 billion pieces of paper were to be put end to end, they would wrap around the circumference of the Earth 14.7 times, or reach the moon and come halfway back again. When they said Brexit would be a stellar success, that was not what I thought they had in mind. sorry. Marks and Spencer's recently hit out against the Brexit bureaucracy that plagues our economy. And I want to share some of their examples because it perfectly illustrates the day-to-day impact of the current Brexit deal has on constraining our economy ability to grow. So, John, before Brexit, lorries full of produce from Scotland to the Republic of Ireland would need just one piece of paper listing what was in the trailer before setting off. Now their trucks are armed with over 200 pieces of paper, which takes hours to complete and requires niche details like the Latin name for the chicken used in their tikka masalas. Around 7,000 different Marks and Spencer's products are destined for Irish customers, require export health certificates, and each certificate requires a vet to sign it off, costing Marks and Spencer's over £1 million a year. Exporting to the EU has become a nightmare, even for bigger companies, because of unnecessary admin and physical checks. I will.
Wind up in a few moments so we can get the other speakers in, so probably be better if we didn't take it. petition.
Okay.
Forgive me, but I want to get these other people a chance.
Quick. Okay. The Prime Minister and others have started the resetting of the relationship with Europe. It can't be easy because of the trust has been lost from European leaders. It's completely disappeared. But we have to ask the Minister, when can we expect tangible changes to be made to the trading relationship with the UK and the EU? Does the Minister recognise the difficulties that 2 billion pieces of paperwork has on our businesses and that it is massively constraining our ability to grow? Thank you.
Hear, hear. Kohler.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. This is an issue close to the hearts of many of my constituents in Wimbledon and the key reason why I have the honour and privilege of representing them in Parliament today. We all know, well, almost all of us know, that the Tories' botched Brexit deal has been a disaster for our country. They should hang their heads in shame, as should the previous leader of the Labour Party, who, amongst various failings, whipped his party in favour of triggering Article 50, firing the starting pistol on our leaving the EU, without any thought as to what form of that exit might take. And let's not forget the role of the member for Clacton and his band of bickering reform buddies, who, along with Trump and Putin, long advocated this hugely damaging, deeply unpatriotic act of self-harm, tearing up Churchill's roadmap that sought to place the UK at the heart of Europe, the behest of their idols in the Kremlin and now the White House. The signatories of this petition are, of course, right to point out that Brexit has failed to deliver any tangible benefits. All it's done is burden businesses with red tape, restrict opportunities for young people and weaken our economy. However, this debate should not be about the past, but the future. How do we now get out of the mess caused by the mendacity of reform, the opportunism of the Conservative Party, the dogma of the Northern Ireland Unionists, and the weakness of the previous Labour leadership? But if the government is serious about growing the economy and Britain regaining its global economic, cultural and political prominence, it must begin by meaningfully re-engaging with Europe. The EU is still our closest trading partner, accounting for 42% of our exports in 2023. Yet the Conservative Brexit deal erected unnecessary trade barriers, creating expensive red tape that's holding back British firms, especially small businesses, costing our economy millions in lost exports. However, whilst the current government talks big on growth, it is failing to deliver. As I said in the Chamber last November, the Chancellor's so-called budget for growth didn't do what it said on the tin, but kicked that very can down the road, although perhaps I should have said into the gutter. Closer ties with the EU is the fastest way to kickstart growth. But whilst the government continues to tie itself up with various red lines, it leaves itself with precious little room to negotiate. A youth mobility scheme of the EU would be a crucial first step forward. It is ludicrous that the government refuses to consider it. The current arrangement is not only harming our economy, but also denying our young people life-enhancing experiences. Furthermore, we will join Erasmus+. The UK's exit from this programme has deprived students of valuable opportunities to study, learn and live in Europe, preventing young people from experiencing the cultural, professional benefits of living and working in not just EU states, but the many non-EU countries in the scheme as well. We also need to start talking to the EU about joining the PEM and then the Customs Union, as that would cut much of the red tape currently hampering our exporters. By doing so, we would remove unnecessary barriers, boost exports and lower the cost of imports, providing much-needed relief to businesses and consumers alike. Admittedly, joining the Customs Union would preclude us signing trade deals of our own. But given the experience thus far of the disadvantageous ones struck with Australia and New Zealand, that would be no bad thing, especially with Trump now raising the prospect of us agreeing one with the US, which, on all the evidence thus far, will doubtless benefit him far more than us. The cultural impact of Brexit has been equally damaging to the UK. Britain is a global cultural leader, with our actors, artists and musicians renowned worldwide. However, Brexit has made it significantly harder for them to tour Europe due to expensive visas and excessive paperwork. The Lib Dems will push for cost-free, paper-free, short-term travel for UK artists and their support staff. We must also rejoin the EU's Creative Europe programme to ensure British culture continues to thrive on the international stage. As I've outlined, if we want to restore Britain's place in the world, we must meaningfully re-engage with Europe. However, I do not advocate rejoining the EU overnight. The damage caused by Brexit is not only economic, but also social. We all remember the friction it caused within families and communities and between the regions and countries of the UK. Yes, we must eventually rejoin the EU, but we can only do so by bringing the country, not just a wafer thin majority, with us. Whilst any party that won an election on a mandate to rejoin the EU would walk into the subsequent negotiations naked, with no means of avoiding a hard deal. Admittedly, it is highly unlikely we will ever be able to rejoin on the favourable terms we once had and have now forsaken. But it's critical we negotiate from a position of strength, as Tony Blair has advocated, and do not go into any talks with a begging bowl, merely asking to rejoin. That's why the Lib Dems have set out a clear, pragmatic roadmap to rebuilding our ties with the EU. First by rejoining European agencies and programmes, then by negotiating a customs union and then the single market. These steps will help restore Britain's prosperity, repair the damage caused by Brexit and bring back some of the opportunities we lost. The message from this petition is clear. The British people want a better future. They see the failure of Brexit, understand that our country's prosperity, security and influence depended on closer ties with Europe. The Conservative government wrecked our relationship with the EU. The new Labour government refuses to take the necessary steps to repair it. The government must do what is right for the British public and not just run scared of the member for Clacton and the rest of his quarrelsome ragbag of little Europeans and cheerleaders for Trump and Putin. We are part of Europe, and one day, I have no doubt, we will rejoin the EU and regain our position at its heart, just as Winston Churchill advocated. Until that day, we must work tirelessly towards fostering ever closer cooperation by breaking free from the red lines by which this government has tied itself and bound itself so unnecessarily. Thank you.
Matthews. Yes. Brian, 4 minutes, if you can do it.
Yes, I'll get it in. Sir John, thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I thank the honourable member for Cole Valley for introducing this valuable and vital debate, as well as the 260-odd constituents of mine who also signed the petition, including many musicians and those who work in the music industry from Real World Studios in Box. Members have also spoken eloquently about our need to take steps to rejoin the EU. Ironically, what is happening the other side of the Atlantic may also be driving the desire for this even faster. With Trump in the White House, it's even more vital that we re-establish our relationship with our European friends. Security has been mentioned, and this is not only in a military sense. Cuts to USAID, for example, have imperiled the WHO's early warning system for identifying and taking action on dangerous diseases. A month ago, there was an outbreak of the Marburg virus in Tanzania. A week ago, there was a Lassa fever case here in London. Ebola could easily outbreak at any time. COVID has taught us we live in a small world, and the early warning system has now gone. The EU has the power to replace USAID, and rejoining the EU could help direct us. Rejoining the EU could help direct the EU to these and other dangers. In a dangerous world, we must reconnect with our European friends and allies. Good for us, good for Europe, and good for the world. For our security, for our economy, and for our health, let's rejoin the EU. Thank you.
Appreciate it. You've got 2 minutes, Jim. Jim Shannon.
I'll talk as fast, even faster than I normally do. A real pleasure to serve under your chairship. Can I first of all say I'm a Brexiteer, it's no secret. I voted to leave. My constituent Strangford voted to leave, 55% to 45% to leave. Now, if I take the logic of some of the Democrats in here, that Scotland decided to stay, if you take it their vote, Wales did theirs, England did theirs, Northern Ireland did theirs. But the vote was all of us together to make a decision. So whether you like democracy or whether you don't, that's the way it is. I've been a politician for a great many years. I canvass people and try to encourage them in relation to the Belfast Agreement to use their vote and to vote against the agreement. I fundamentally disagreed with allowing prisoners out of jail. I fundamentally disagreed with disbanding of the RUC and the cloud which settled over the UDR. All of these things I absolutely oppose with every sinew of my body. But however, I accepted the will of the people who said that's what they wanted, and I went ahead with that. I've worked within an institution that is fundamentally flawed, and the outworking of these concessions contained within the simple yes or no referendum have had lasting results. Fishing is vital to my constituency. The changes that the government sought are ones that I hope to see benefit us in the process as we move forward for quotas, for jobs, for opportunities. I could raise the question of the benefits of rejoining the EU. I could highlight the vile and repugnant way in which many constituents have been used by the EU to hurt the UK for daring to leave. I could talk about the lack of seeds, of packages, of medication, of chocolate biscuits, of sausages, the damage to our micro businesses from the EU regulations, the fact that Northern Ireland is precluded from state aid, the fact that we have restriction and no representation. I could argue with anyone the fact that their treatment of Northern Ireland as a whole indicates the rotten nature of the EU. But the fact of the matter is that none of this really matters. I would urge the Minister and the Labour government not to give up our fishing rights. The UK voted to take them back, and that is what the government must adhere to and must respect. I conclude with this, Mr. Chairman, very mindful of what you've told me. The will of the people is all that matters, and they have spoken. Without another referendum, there can be no return, and in my opinion, there should be no return. We are all Democrats, elected by the democratic system. So with that in mind, democracy may not be palatable at times, but it has to be respected at all times, and that is a full stop in any debate regarding this issue. Thanks so much.
Perfect, Chairman. Sir Rona.
Thank you very much, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to begin by thanking the member for Colne Valley for opening this excellent debate we've had this afternoon, and also to extend my thanks to Mr McMaster for initiating the petition, and to the 130,000 members of the public who signed it and whose desire for the UK to once again be at the heart of Europe has today brought together members from across the House for this debate. You can see from the number of Liberal Democrat contributions to this debate that this is a subject that's very, very important to our party. The member for Tunbridge Wells talked about the impact on defence. The member for Stratford-upon-Avon talked about higher education. The member for Lewis talked about youth mobility, the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention. The member for Brecon, Radnor and Cwm Tawy talked about the impact on farmers. The member for Bath, it was a very personal reflection on her own journey, and I'm grateful to her for that. The member for South Devon talked about fishing. The member for Wokingham, very eloquent on the barriers to trade. The member for Wimbledon, I would say a polemic, which I really enjoyed. And the member for Melksham and Devizes, an interesting contribution, particularly about the impact that it's having on health cooperation, and I thank him for that. There were many other contributions from other parties. I particularly wanted to thank the member for Walthamstow for her very striking speech and the very striking metaphors. I have to say, a night out in Walthamstow sounds somewhat messier than a night out in Richmond, but I'm very grateful to her for her contribution. And members from other parties mentioned the impact on tourism, particularly musicians touring, language schools, international aid. The member for Banbury had some very interesting things to say about supply chains. It would have been lovely to have heard from members of the Tory party, but we look forward to the member for Fylde when he speaks after me. It seems really extraordinary how much time this took in the chamber, across the country, over so many years, and there isn't a single member of the Conservative Party here to defend what their party did while they were in government, apart from the poor member for Fylde, who wasn't even here at the time. Liberal Democrats are proud to be the most pro-European party, and we have been vocal in our support for the government's warm words regarding a reset and a rebuilding of our relationship with Europe after the disaster of the botched Brexit deal left by the last Conservative government. We are, however, concerned that these warm words are not leading to action. The wholly inadequate deal with the EU, negotiated by the previous Conservative government, has done enormous damage to British businesses. We've seen soaring export costs, increased workforce shortages and reams of red tape creating huge barriers to growth. Having spent the last 5 years grappling with the bureaucracy of Brexit and increased trading costs, many business owners across the country will now be deeply concerned by the additional challenges to businesses coming from Washington. The returning Trump administration has fundamentally changed trading relations globally with the introduction of high tariffs, which we already have on steel and which are being threatened in other areas too. It's vital that the UK leads on the world stage again, standing up for our interests by working closely with other countries.
most importantly our European neighbours, which is why I'm so glad to be here today to speak alongside colleagues from all parties to advocate for a constructive rebuilding of our relationship with Europe. The new global security and geopolitical landscape has shifted since the Brexit vote of 2016, with an aggressive Russia, an assertive China and the return of a Trump administration in the US. The case for closer cross-channel ties with the EU are made far more urgent. The government is rightly looking to build closer defence and security agreements with Europe, and I'm glad that the government has embarked on these vital security negotiations. However, recent reports suggest that despite being part of the European coalition of the willing, UK arms companies won't be included in a new €150 billion EU commitment for an increase of defence capabilities unless the government agrees to defence and security partnerships with Brussels. We know that European officials are insisting that these defence agreements come in tandem with other partnerships, including a youth mobility scheme, and urge them to take that logical step and agree to a scheme which is such a clear win-win for everyone. As the Minister knows, the Liberal Democrats believe that a key and pragmatic step in this rebuilding is in introducing a youth mobility scheme between the UK and the EU. Despite recent reports in the press that the government had plans to introduce such a scheme and encouraging words from the Prime Minister himself just last week in response to a question by my honourable friend, the member for Epsom and Ewell on this topic, it has been deeply disappointing to hear the Home Secretary and other ministers rule this out, despite knowing that an agreement on youth mobility would not lead to freedom of movement. A youth mobility deal would be good for our economy, especially our tourism and hospitality sectors, while providing young British people the opportunity to work and study abroad. This would be a win-win. And not only that, it's what the British public want. Polling shows that 2/3 of the UK population are in favour of a youth mobility scheme, and the scheduling of today's debate is further proof of the appetite across the country for closer ties with Europe. Introducing a youth mobility scheme between the EU and the UK would send a clear message that this country is serious about supporting our young people and backing British business with the labour force it needs to grow. The EU has been very clear that they would welcome a youth mobility scheme, and it has now signalled that agreeing to such a scheme will be a necessary step before broader partnerships, including those on defence, can be established. So I urge the government to embark on these negotiations to expand opportunities for young people across the country and acknowledge the broader benefits which this scheme would provide. And will the Minister acknowledge that such a scheme would not cross any of the government's red lines regarding a European reset? More broadly, as the Minister will be aware, the previous government accepted an agreement allowing EU member state nationals visiting the UK to benefit from a 6-month visa waiver, while UK nationals are limited to 90-day visa waivers when visiting the Schengen area. This is a further example of the appalling deal the previous Conservative government secured. Has the Minister considered redressing this imbalance and securing a fair, reciprocal and inclusive mobility agreement with the EU that provides for a 6-month visa waiver in both directions? The EU is our closest neighbour and our largest trading partner. I sense the Minister knows that we have to get on with repairing the trading relationship that was so badly damaged under the former Conservative government. The botched Brexit deal has been a complete disaster for our country, especially for small businesses, who are held back by reams of red tape and new barriers to trade, costing our economy billions in lost exports. The dismal picture of the financial impact of our withdrawal from the EU becomes increasingly clear. A recent survey of 10,000 UK businesses found that 33.5% of currently trading enterprises experienced extra costs directly related to changes in export regulations due to the end of the EU transition period. Since 2019, global British goods exports have increased by just 0.3% a year, compared with an OECD average of 4.2%. Small businesses have suffered even more significantly, dropping by 30%, and 20,000 small firms stopped all exports to the EU. A recent study has found that goods exports have fallen by 6.4% since the trade deal came into force in 2021. So I urge the government to acknowledge the damage that our current trading relationship with Europe continues to do, not just to individual businesses, but to the economy as a whole, and take the sensible step of negotiating a new UK-EU customs union to ease the pressure which so many businesses are under. The Minister in the past had talked of pragmatic negotiation. Surely what is pragmatic is to drop the government's red lines and agree to a new UK-EU customs union. It would be the single biggest step the government could take to unlock growth, and the Liberal Democrats will continue to call on the government to do the right thing for our businesses. The government has made it clear that their #1 priority is economic growth, yet any proposal that might involve our European neighbours and contribute to boosting growth is dismissed. This scheme is a pragmatic and mutually beneficial proposal which will benefit the UK economy and labour market in the long term, stimulating growth which the country so clearly needs. The changes to the immigration system implemented in April 2024, increasing the minimum salary threshold for skilled worker visas, shrank the talent pool that hospitality businesses can recruit from, contributing to greater staff shortages in that sector. Around 3/4 of hospitality's workforce is filled by UK citizens, but international talent has always been attracted to work in the UK due to our pedigree for hospitality and developing careers. A 2024 survey of 1,650 employers from across a range of sectors, including hospitality, adult social care and manufacturing, found that 49% of employers with hard-to-fill vacancies said that a reduction in the availability of migrant workers was one of the main causes. And at a time when recent government decisions at the budget have added to the overall tax burden on hospitality businesses, with many considering whether their business remains viable, we must provide the tools that hospitality needs to help businesses grow so that it can help boost the wider economy, including ensuring access to global talent. I've heard from stakeholders in the hospitality sector, including business owners and supply chain managers, who said they would welcome proposals which would bring more stability to the sector, allowing them to make longer-term plans as part of a more predictable and robust regulatory framework. So in conclusion, while the government have been clear on their red lines, no single market, no customs union, no free movement of people, I'm glad to have heard today cross-party support for serious negotiations with our European neighbours. Liberal Democrats will continue to advocate for a fundamental reset of our relations with the EU. That means taking steps to fix the trading relationship in line with our four-stage roadmap. First, resolving the low-hanging fruit like youth mobility, then steps like a veterinary agreement and recognition of professional mutual qualifications, and then a UK-EU customs union setting us back on the path to the single market. And in the longer term, our ambition remains to see the UK at the heart of the EU once more. Rebuilding our relationships with Europe is a fundamental part of making Britain more secure and prosperous. With the threat of tariffs from the new Trump administration, it's never been more important for our government to break down barriers to trade that were erected under the previous Conservative government. By repairing our relationship with the EU, we will be able to deal with this unreliable and unpredictable actor in the White House from a position of strength. Does the Minister not agree with me that taking decisive steps, such as negotiating a new UK-EU customs union, establishing a youth mobility scheme and reducing red tape for high street businesses is the best way to achieve the growth which this government is so focused on and which our country so desperately needs? Thank you, Sir John.
Thank you, Sarah. Order. Before I call our final two speakers, can I thank colleagues for their brevity, particularly Clive and Paul and Brian and Jim. I didn't give you much choice, but which allowed everyone to get in. And while I'm in the chair, I always hope that I'll ensure everyone gets their chance to have their say. And could I just say to the Minister, do leave Paul a couple of seconds at the end to say a final word, and please do leave the Minister plenty of time to respond. With that, Shadow Minister Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve in this debate with you in the chair, Sir John. And thank you to the member for Colne Valley for leading this debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee, and to everyone who has contributed in this debate. And whilst there have been in this debate some valuable and considered contributions, it has at times and in parts felt like that display of a Remainer patronising echo chamber. We know best. If only they had listened to all of our selectively picked stats. Brexiteers didn't know what they were voting for, indeed sniggering at the honourable member for Strangford in his earlier intervention when he was talking about the kind of Brexit he believed in. Brexiteers insulted as people who were labelled and compared with weirdos, or actually compared to people who assault people on a night out, which I thought was a bit of a rich and testing comparison for a Labour MP at the moment, given their own troubles on that front. And come on, it's even been blamed on Russia. So I don't think, from listening to the contributions today, that many of the arch Remainer MPs here have learnt much from why they lost the referendum in the first place. And I think we can all remember where we were when we found out the result of the referendum. For me, having delayed a mini break with my wife to the Lake District so I could spend the 23rd of June campaigning for vote leave, Once we'd arrived at our hotel, I decided it would be testing Mrs Snowdon's generous patience and forgiveness if I spent the night and early hours watching the results come in. So it was early the following morning, I am sure to the annoyance of the other guests, I woke up with my shouts of jubilation that I found out we had voted to leave the European Union. But I accept that whilst this was a day of celebration for many, it was also one of disappointment and even anger for others. However, the verdict issued by the British public that day was a final and binding decision, backed up with a confirmatory vote in 2019 when the Conservatives achieved a crystal-clear mandate to get Brexit done. Since 2020, we have not been low on time. Since 2020, we have seen the benefit of an independent Britain. The EU withdrawal bill gave us freedoms over our borders, waters and our money, while offering the UK the chance to regulate and legislate in our own national interest. We are no longer bound by the free movement of people obligation that came with membership, giving us a much stronger say over who can and cannot enter this country legally. We departed the common fisheries policy, meaning for the first time since 1973 we had sovereignty over our own waters. And the Conservative government used our new fiscal policy freedoms to cut VAT across a range of customer products and establish a number of free ports, stimulating growth in all the nations and regions of the UK. But most obviously, our economic independence from the European Union has facilitated significant opportunity for tailored deals, helping to build British business and our wider economy. Under the last Conservative government, 73 separate trade deals, alongside a deal with the EU, were secured. But this will only continue to happen if we acknowledge and appreciate both the strong democratic mandate we were given, as well as the opportunities secured as a result. But it is starting to look like the current government has little interest in promoting the successes of our independence, and as such is unprepared to hold negotiations with the EU from a position of strength. Just last week, the German ambassador told the British Chamber of Commerce that for Germany, at least, this government's so-called reset with the EU is an opportunity for us to join the customs union. I would therefore appreciate if the Minister could make clear that this will not be a consideration in any future negotiations. We also know that Brussels is also committed to demanding that the UK surrenders our newfound fishing rights and controls, leaving our waters at the mercy of French trawlers and leaving our fishing industry at serious risk. So can I ask the Minister very clearly if that surrender is on the table or not? And whilst the Minister is here and can hopefully provide answers, can they confirm if a youth mobility scheme is off the table? And if it is, what has she been told by our European counterparts as to their position? As from what we know, the European Commission has made this a central demand. Today, we have seen further reporting that the government is set to cancel the single trade window. Can the Minister confirm very clearly that this will not lead to deeper EU-UK regulatory alignment in its place? So far, this government has shown an inability to clarify and solidify their position on any of these issues and has been remarkably opaque about the form and content of discussions held with EU counterparts. But we Conservatives have been very clear and set out 5 tests that we hope the government will take up in order to ensure that we protect our independence from the European Union and the successes, both future and past, resulting from it. So can the Minister commit here today that 1, there will be no backsliding on free movement or compulsory asylum transfers; 2, the UK will not allow any new money to be paid to the EU; 3, there will be no reduction in our fishing rights; 4, there will be no new rule-taking, dynamic alignment or European court jurisdiction for the UK; and 5, there will be no compromise of the primacy of NATO as the cornerstone of European security. These are our tests for acceptable engagement, and if the government remains within them, it will have our support. The UK must pursue its own interests, working with our European partners, but not captive to purely their interests. And ultimately, the government must respect the will of the British public who voted to leave the European Union.
Parliamentary Under Secretary of the Cabinet Office, Abina Apongasar.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank my honourable friend Cole Vanny for moving this motion. I'm sure everyone will agree he has spoken very passionately about the motion, and I'm going to try and leave some time aside so he can respond. I want to say firstly, I'm grateful for the opportunity to respond to the petitions debate on behalf of the government, and I'd also like to thank the Petitions Committee for their work in representing constituents, particularly across the country, and those that signed the petition. I've been asked this through various times in this debate, and I thought it would be better for me to be very clear from the outset, and with members of public that signed this petition, that this government will not seek to rejoin the EU, nor will there be a return to the freedom of movement, the customs union or the single market, as we set out in our general election manifesto. This was a clear commitment ahead of our election, where the government secured a significant majority. That manifesto was clear on the benefits of seeking a closer relationship with the EU, and since July last year, this government has just been doing that, led by the Prime Minister and the Minister for the European Union Relations. This closer, more cooperative relationship with the EU is the UK's national interest. This government is working to increase security, safety and prosperity. Security in terms of responding to a once-in-a-generation moment for the collective security of our continent through our ambitious UK and EU security and defence relationship. In safety, we know that we must do what we can to strengthen our collective ability to tackle organised crime and criminality and work together on illegal migration, which is a challenge across the whole of the continent. And we're also, in terms of prosperity, to grow the economy and boost living standards, we need to build export and investment opportunities for UK business and reduce barriers to trade with our biggest trading partners. All of this means that we need to be ruthlessly pragmatic in seeking closer and more cooperative relationship with the EU. I want to take this opportunity to reassure members who have raised concerns about the loss of data sharing and tackling matters such as cross-border crime. We've already increased the UK presence at Europol and want to further do this by including more coordination on real-time data sharing and arrest warrants. The Home Office Minister, Secretary of State, the Home Secretary was in Northern Ireland with her counterpart in recent weeks, showing just the kind of joint working that we want to see more of. I'm also grateful for the contributions by Welsh colleagues on this debate. I know Wales is a proud trading nation, and that is why Welsh businesses will stand to benefit from this government efforts to tackle barriers to trade, not least the SPS agreement to make it easier. My honourable friend for Walthamstow has worked tirelessly on this issue, and I know that she is an esteemed campaigner, and she is right to say that this is not a quick process. I also want to take the opportunity to mention that my honourable friend from Macclesfield reminded us today that someone was sadly killed during the EU campaign. And I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to Joe Cox, who was a passionate campaigner on this issue. I know that a number of colleagues have raised concerns about the impact the EU has had on businesses, and we know that the global economic headwinds of recent years have not always been easy for businesses, and I've heard evidence from colleagues in this debate today. And that's why we want to tackle the barriers to trade for businesses, and we know that facilitating business mobility is in our shared interest with the EU, supporting trade and growth on both sides of the Channel. The Chancellor has also made it clear that our biggest trading partner is the EU, with trade totaling over £800 billion in 2023. So I just want to reassure colleagues who have raised concerns about trade that the government's #1 priority will be the growth of the UK economy and free and open trade with our most economically important partners who will be delivering on that. I'll give way.
What she said will come as a crushing blow to all the Europhiles that we've heard from the Labour Party today, no ambition for the single market, no ambition for the customs union, but can she at least suggest that she'll possibly look at a youth mobility scheme?
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question, and I've made it very clear. And as I do know, in the past, the SNP hasn't voted in the past for the customs union, and we are following very clearly what people have asked us to do in terms of the manifesto commitment. In terms of the Erasmus scheme, that was raised by colleagues, particularly from Durford, Merron, Knight. Apologies if I've not pronounced that right. We are working with higher education sector to ensure our world-leading universities continue to attract the brightest, the best, and support our economy. But I have to say to the Honourable Member, we have no plans for rejoining the Erasmus scheme. And I know that members have raised concerns about opportunities for young people and have raised their proposals for the youth mobility scheme. The government recognises the value of people-to-people connections and the value of schemes which give young people the opportunity to experience different cultures and work or study elsewhere. For example, the Touring Scheme is the UK's government's programme for students to study and work anywhere in the world. Since 2021, it has helped. I would give way, but we're running out of time, and I really want to give the Honourable Member an opportunity to respond. Since 2021, it has helped tens of thousands of UK students to develop new skills, gain international experience and boost their employability, both in the EU and beyond. Separate to touring, the UK operates a number of bilateral youth mobility schemes, both with European countries such as Iceland, but also with a number of global partners such as India, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. We are also committed to resetting the relationship with the EU to improve British people's security, safety and prosperity. However, we do not have plans for a youth mobility agreement. We will of course listen to sensible proposals, but we have been clear there will be no return to the freedom of movement, the customs union or the single market. Of course, we are looking to maximise the benefits of the EU relationship. It's a whole commitment which echoes the Right Honourable for Ruscliffe, who made the point of urging the government to think creatively. My Right Honourable friend, the Minister for European Union Relations, is leading that charge through regular engagement with the EU counterpart, Maros Sefcovic, most recently at a meeting at the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly of Brussels on the 17th of March. The Foreign Secretary attended the EU Foreign Affairs Council, where he and EU High Representatives for Foreign Affairs agreed to work towards a security partnership and committed to 6 monthly foreign policy dialogues. And also the Chancellor recently attended the EU group, where she outlined how the reset in relations is about doing what is best in the interests of our shared economies. This work is supported by much greater cooperation between the UK and EU. So far, we have had over 70 direct engagements between UK ministers and their EU counterparts since coming into government. So I hope that reassures members that the relationship and the work that ministers are doing with the EU is really strong, and that we are very focused on strengthening that relationship in the best interests of this country. So looking ahead in May, we will welcome EU leaders to the UK for the first UK-EU summit, and we believe that this summit will provide an opportunity to make further progress on areas which will deliver benefits to British people. And this will be guided by our mutual benefit in terms of finding collaborative solutions to our common programmes. This is not a zero-sum game, but it is a win-win on both sides, with people across the UK and the EU benefiting. This is about turning the page, reforming alliances, and also forging those new relationships with our European friends. And I want to be very clear that as a government, we will be open-minded and pragmatic about proposals that that would improve British people's security, safety and prosperity, while keeping clear our red lines that we will not compromise on. In this time of change, the government is stepping up to build alliances in a bid to make people safer and more prosperous. That is the core of our national interest.
Thank you, Minister. And now, Paul Davies, to wind up, and just give me a little time to move the motion, Paul, if you would. Thank you.
Thanks, Sir John. Most importantly, Robert, I'd like to thank you again. I think you can see, the high-quality debate that your petition has initiated in this room. I think it's been quite remarkable, and I think the other thing that stands out, which is something which gives us hope for the future, is the tolerance, which you've seen in this room as well. There's been strong views from some people. There have been some consensus, but there's been an ability for people to express those views freely, and very different, I think, to what many of us experienced during the actual Brexit debate itself on the ground. Many of us were knocking doors at that time, and I think we can all remember some of that as well. Certainly, I think this gives us a good foundation for this debate to go forward further. And again, it's been a pleasure meeting both of you. I know you've had a short visit, and I hope you enjoyed that. Once again, Robert, seeing you around the palace, and I'm sure that you're going to continue to campaign going forward for us to rejoin the EU. Thanks again. Thank you.
Well, the question is that this House has considered the e-petition 700005 relating to the UK joining the European Union. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.